These, in the ancient world, were regarded as of a higher rank than tragedy, of a deeper truth, of a more difficult realization, of a sounder structure, and of a revelation more complete. The happy ending of the fairy tale, the myth, and the divine comedy of the soul is to be read, not as a contradiction, but as a transcendence of the universal tragedy of man. The objective world remains what it was, but, because of a shift of emphasis within the subject, is beheld as though transformed. Where formerly life and death contended, now enduring being is made manifest, as indifferent to the accidents of time as water boiling in a pot is to the destiny of a bubble, or as the cosmos to the appearance and disappearance of a galaxy of stars. Tragedy is the shattering of the forms and of our attachment to the forms, comedy, the wild and careless, inexhaustible joy of life invincible. Thus the two are the terms of a single mythological theme and experience which includes them both in which they bound, the downgoing and the upcoming, kathodos and anidos, which together constitute the totality of the revelation that is life, and which the individual must know and love if he is to be purged. Catharsis equals purgatorio, of the contagion of sin, disobedience to the divine will, and death, identification with the mortal form. All things are changing, nothing dies. The spirit wanders, comes now here, now there, and occupies whatever frame it pleases. For that which once existed is no more, and that which was not has come to be, and so the whole round of motion is gone through again. 34. Only the bodies, of which this eternal, imperishable, incomprehensible self is the indweller, are said to have an end. 35. It is the business of mythology proper, and of the fairy tale, to reveal the specific dangers and techniques of the dark interior way from tragedy to comedy. Hence the incidents are fantastic and unreal, they represent psychological, not physical, triumphs. Even when the legend is of an actual historical personage, the deeds of victory are rendered, not in lifelike, but in dreamlike figurations. For the point is not that such and such was done on earth. The point is that, before such and such could be done on earth, this other, more important, primary thing had to be brought to pass within the labyrinth that we all know and visit in our dreams. The passage of the mythological hero may be over ground, incidentally, fundamentally it is inward, into depths where obscure resistances are overcome, and long lost, forgotten powers are revivified, to be made available for the transfiguration of the world. This deed accomplished, life no longer suffers hopelessly under the terrible mutilations of ubiquitous disaster, battered by time, hideous throughout space. But with its horror visible still, its cries of anguish still tumultuous, it becomes penetrated by an all-suffusing, all-sustaining love, and a knowledge of its own unconquered power. Something of the light that blazes invisible within the abysses of its normally opaque materiality breaks forth, with an increasing uproar. The dreadful mutilations are then seen as shadows, only, of an imminent, imperishable eternity. Time yields to glory, and the world sings with the prodigious, angelic, but perhaps finally monotonous, siren music of the spheres. Like happy families, the myths and the worlds redeemed are all alike. Figure 6. The Monster Tamer, inlaid shell and lapis lazuli, Sumerian, Iraq, circa 2652,400 B.C. 3. The hero and the god. The standard path of the mythological adventure of the hero is a magnification of the formula represented in the rites of passage, separation, initiation, return, which might be named the nuclear unit of the monomyth. 36. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered and a decisive victory is won. Y. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Z. Prometheus ascended to the heavens, stole fire from the gods, and descended. Jason sailed through the clashing rocks into a sea of marvels, circumvented the dragon that guarded the golden fleece, and returned with the fleece and the power to wrest his rightful throne from a usurper. Aeneas went down into the underworld, crossed the dreadful river of the dead, threw a sop to the three-headed watchdog Cerberus, and conversed, at last, with the shade of his dead father. All things were unfolded to him, the destiny of souls, the destiny of Rome, which he was about to found, and in what wise he might avoid or endure every burden. 37. He returned through the ivory gate to his work in the world. A majestic representation of the difficulties of the hero task, and of its sublime import when it is profoundly conceived and solemnly undertaken, is presented in the traditional legend of the great struggle of the Buddha. The young prince Gautama Sakyamuni set forth secretly from his father's palace on the princely steed Kanthaka, passed miraculously through the guarded gate, rode through the night attended by the torches of 4 times 60,000 divinities, lightly hurdled the majestic river 1128 cubits wide, and then with a single sword stroke sheared his own royal locks, whereupon the remaining hair, 2 finger breadths in length, curled to the right and lay close to his head. Assuming the garments of a monk, he moved as a beggar through the world, and during these years of apparently aimless wandering acquired and transcended the 8 stages of meditation. He retired to a hermitage, bent his powers 6 more years to the great struggle, carried austerity to the uttermost, and collapsed in seeming death, but presently recovered. Then he returned to the less rigorous life of the ascetic wanderer. One day he sat beneath a tree, contemplating the eastern quarter of the world, and the tree was illuminated with his radiance. A young girl named Sujata came and presented milk rice to him in a golden bowl, and when he tossed the empty bowl into a river it floated upstream. This was the signal that the moment of his triumph was at hand. He arose and proceeded along a road which the gods had decked and which was 1128 cubits wide. The snakes and birds and the divinities of the woods and fields did him homage with flowers and celestial perfumes, heavenly choirs poured forth music, the 10,000 worlds were filled with perfumes, garlands, harmonies, and shouts of acclaim. For he was on his way to the great tree of enlightenment, the bow tree, under which he was to redeem the universe. He placed himself, with a firm resolve, beneath the bow tree, on the immovable spot, and straightway was approached by Kamamara, the god of love and death. The dangerous god appeared mounted on an elephant and carrying weapons in his 1,000 hands. He was surrounded by his army, which extended 12 leagues before him, 12 to the right, 12 to the left, and in the rear as far as to the confines of the world. It was 9 leagues high. The protecting deities of the universe took flight, but the future Buddha remained unmoved beneath the tree. And the god then assailed him, seeking to break his concentration. Whirlwind, rocks, thunder and flame, smoking weapons with keen edges, burning coals, hot ashes, boiling mud, blistering sands and fourfold darkness, the antagonist hurled against the savior, but the missiles were all transformed into celestial flowers and ointments by the power of Gautama's 10 perfections. Kamamara then deployed his daughters, desire, pining, and lust, surrounded by voluptuous attendants, but the mind of the great being was not distracted. The god finally challenged his right to be sitting on the immovable spot, flung his razor-sharp discus angrily, and bid the towering host of the army to let fly at him with mountain crags. But the future Buddha only moved his hand to touch the ground with his fingertips, and thus bid the goddess Earth bear witness to his right to be sitting where he was. She did so with 100, 1,000, 100,000 roars, so that the elephant of the antagonist fell upon its knees in obeisance to the future Buddha. The army was immediately dispersed, and the gods of all the worlds scattered garlands. Having won that preliminary victory before sunset, the conqueror acquired in the first watch of the night knowledge of his previous existences, in the second watch the divine eye of omniscient vision, and in the last watch understanding of the chain of causation. He experienced perfect enlightenment at the break of day. Then for 7 days, Gautama, now the Buddha, the enlightened, sat motionless in bliss. For 7 days he stood apart and regarded the spot on which he had received enlightenment. For 7 days he paced between the place of the sitting and the place of the standing. For 7 days he abode in a pavilion furnished by the gods and reviewed the whole doctrine of causality and release. For 7 days he sat beneath the tree where the girl Sujata had brought him milk rice in a golden bowl, and there meditated on the doctrine of the sweetness of nirvana. He removed to another tree and a great storm raged for 7 days, but the king of serpents emerged from the roots and protected the Buddha with his expanded hood. Finally, the Buddha sat for 7 days beneath the 4th tree enjoying still the sweetness of liberation. Then he doubted whether his message could be communicated, and he thought to retain the wisdom for himself, but the god Brahma descended from the zenith to implore that he should become the teacher of gods and men. The Buddha was thus persuaded to proclaim the path. And he went back into the cities of men where he moved among the citizens of the world, bestowing the inestimable boon of the knowledge of the way. 38. Figure 7. Sakyamuni Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, carved schist, India, circa late 9th early 10th century A.D. The Buddha's enlightenment is the most important single moment in Oriental mythology, a counterpart of the crucifixion of the West. The Buddha beneath the tree of enlightenment, the bow tree, and Christ on Holy Rood, the tree of redemption, are analogous figures, incorporating an archetypal world savior, world tree motif, which is of immemorial antiquity. Many other variants of the theme will be found among the episodes to come. The immovable spot and Mount Calvary are images of the world navel, or world axis, see page 32. The calling of the earth to witness is represented in traditional Buddhist art by images of the Buddha, sitting in the classic Buddha posture, with the right hand resting on the right knee and its fingers lightly touching the ground. The point is that Buddhahood, enlightenment, cannot be communicated, but only the way to enlightenment. This doctrine of the incommunicability of the truth which is beyond names and forms is basic to the great Oriental, as well as to the Platonic traditions. Whereas the truths of science are communicable, being demonstrable hypotheses rationally founded on observable facts, ritual, mythology, and metaphysics are but guides to the brink of a transcendent illumination, the final step to which must be taken by each in his own silent experience. Hence one of the Sanskrit terms for sage is Muni, the silent one. Sakyamuni, one of the titles of Gautama Buddha, means the silent one or sage, Muni, of the Sakya clan. Though he is the founder of a widely taught world religion, the ultimate core of his doctrine remains concealed, necessarily, in silence. The Old Testament records a comparable deed in its legend of Moses, who, in the 3rd month of the departure of Israel out of the land of Egypt, came with his people into the wilderness of Sinai, and there Israel pitched their tents over against the mountain. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called unto him from the mountain. The Lord gave to him the tables of the law and commanded Moses to return with these to Israel, the people of the Lord. 39. Jewish folk legend declares that during the day of the revelation diverse rumblings sounded from Mount Sinai. Flashes of lightning, accompanied by an ever-swelling peal of horns, moved the people with mighty fear and trembling. God bent the heavens, moved the earth, and shook the bounds of the world, so that the depths trembled, and the heavens grew frightened. His splendor passed through the 4 portals of fire, earthquake, storm, and hail. The kings of the earth trembled in their palaces. The earth herself thought the resurrection of the dead was about to take place, and that she would have to account for the blood of the slain she had absorbed, and for the bodies of the murdered whom she covered. The earth was not calmed until she heard the first words of the Decalogue. The heavens opened and Mount Sinai, freed from the earth, rose into the air, so that its summit towered into the heavens, while a thick cloud covered the sides of it, and touched the feet of the divine throne. Accompanying God on one side, appeared 22,000 angels with crowns for the Levites, the only tribe that remained true to God while the rest worshipped the golden calf. On the second side were 60 myriads, 3,550 angels, each bearing a crown of fire for each individual Israelite. Double this number of angels was on the third side, whereas on the fourth side they were simply innumerable. For God did not appear from one direction, but from all simultaneously, which, however, did not prevent his glory from filling the heaven as well as the earth. In spite of these innumerable hosts there was no crowding on Mount Sinai, no mob, there was room for all. 40. As we soon shall see, whether presented in the vast, almost oceanic images of the Orient, in the vigorous narratives of the Greeks, or in the majestic legends of the Bible, the adventure of the hero normally follows the pattern of the nuclear unit above described. A separation from the world, a penetration to some source of power, and a life-enhancing return. The whole of the Orient has been blessed by the boon brought back by Gautama Buddha, his wonderful teaching of the good law, just as the Occident has been by the Decalogue of Moses. The Greeks referred fire, the first support of all human culture, to the world-transcending deed of their Prometheus, and the Romans the founding of their world-supporting city to Aeneas, following his departure from fallen Troy and his visit to the eerie underworld of the dead. Everywhere, no matter what the sphere of interest, whether religious, political, or personal, the really creative acts are represented as those deriving from some sort of dying to the world. And what happens in the interval of the hero's nonentity, so that he comes back as one reborn, made great and filled with creative power, mankind is also unanimous in declaring. We shall have only to follow, therefore, a multitude of heroic figures through the classic stages of the universal adventure in order to see again what has always been revealed. This will help us to understand not only the meaning of those images for contemporary life, but also the singleness of the human spirit in its aspirations, powers, vicissitudes, and wisdom. The following pages will present in the form of one composite adventure the tales of a number of the world's symbolic carriers of the destiny of every man. The first great stage, that of the separation or departure, will be shown in Part 1, Chapter 1, in 5 subsections. The call to adventure, or the signs of the vocation of the hero. Refusal of the call, or the folly of the flight from the god. Supernatural aid, the unsuspected assistance that comes to one who has undertaken his proper adventure. The crossing of the first threshold. The belly of the whale, or the passage into the realm of night. The stage of the trials and victories of initiation will appear in Chapter 2 in 6 subsections. The road of trials, or the dangerous aspect of the gods. The meeting with the goddess, Magna Mater, or the bliss of infancy regained. Woman as the temptress, the realization and agony of Oedipus. Atonement with the father, apotheosis, the ultimate boon. The return and reintegration with society, which is indispensable to the continuous circulation of spiritual energy into the world, and which, from the standpoint of the community, is the justification of the long retreat, the hero himself may find the most difficult requirement of all. For if he has won through, like the Buddha, to the profound repose of complete enlightenment, there is danger that the bliss of this experience may annihilate all recollection of, interest in, or hope for, the sorrows of the world, or else the problem of making known the way of illumination to people wrapped in economic problems may seem too great to solve. And on the other hand, if the hero, instead of submitting to all of the initiatory tests, has, like Prometheus, simply darted to his goal, by violence, quick device, or luck, and plucked the boon for the world that he intended, then the powers that he has unbalanced may react so sharply that he will be blasted from within and without, crucified, like Prometheus, on the rock of his own violated unconscious. Or if the hero, in the third place, makes his safe and willing return, he may meet with such a blank misunderstanding and disregard from those whom he has come to help that his career will collapse. The third of the following chapters will conclude the discussion of these prospects under 6 subheadings. Refusal of the return, or the world denied. The magic flight, or the escape of Prometheus. Rescue from without. The crossing of the return threshold, or the return to the world of common day. Master of the two worlds. Freedom to live, the nature and function of the ultimate boon. This circular adventure of the hero appears in a negative form in stories of the deluge type, where it is not the hero who goes to the power, but the power that rises against the hero, and again subsides. Deluge stories occur in every quarter of the earth. They form an integral portion of the archetypal myth of the history of the world, and so belong properly to Part 2 of the present discussion, the cosmogonic cycle. The deluge hero is a symbol of the germinal vitality of man surviving even the worst tides of catastrophe and sin. The composite hero of the monomyth is a personage of exceptional gifts. Frequently he is honored by his society, frequently unrecognized or disdained. He and/or the world in which he finds himself suffers from a symbolical deficiency. In fairy tales this may be as slight as the lack of a certain golden ring, whereas in apocalyptic vision the physical and spiritual life of the whole earth can be represented as fallen, or on the point of falling into ruin. Typically, the hero of the fairy tale achieves a domestic, microcosmic triumph, and the hero of myth a world historical, macrocosmic triumph. Whereas the former, the youngest or despised child who becomes the master of extraordinary powers, prevails over his personal oppressors, the latter brings back from his adventure the means for the regeneration of his society as a whole. Tribal or local heroes, such as the Emperor Huang Ti, Moses, or the Aztec Tezcatlipoca, commit their boons to a single folk. Universal heroes, Muhammad, Jesus, Gautama Buddha, bring a message for the entire world. Whether the hero be ridiculous or sublime, Greek or barbarian, Gentile or Jew, his journey varies little in essential plan. Popular tales represent the heroic action as physical, the higher religions show the deed to be moral. Nevertheless, there will be found astonishingly little variation in the morphology of the adventure, the character roles involved, the victories gained. If one or another of the basic elements of the archetypal pattern is omitted from a given fairy tale, legend, ritual, or myth, it is bound to be somehow or other implied, and the omission itself can speak volumes for the history and pathology of the example, as we shall presently see. Part 2, the cosmogonic cycle, unrolls the great vision of the creation and destruction of the world which is vouchsafed as revelation to the successful hero. Chapter 1, Emanations, treats of the coming of the forms of the universe out of the void. Chapter 2, The Virgin Birth, is a review of the creative and redemptive roles of the female power, first on a cosmic scale as the mother of the universe, then again on the human plane as the mother of the hero. Chapter 3, Transformations of the Hero, traces the course of the legendary history of the human race through its typical stages, the hero appearing on the scene in various forms according to the changing needs of the race. And Chapter 4, Dissolutions, tells of the foretold end, first of the hero, then of the manifested world. The cosmogonic cycle is presented with astonishing consistency in the sacred writings of all the continents, 41, and it gives to the adventure of the hero a new and interesting turn, for now it appears that the perilous journey was a labor not of attainment but of re-attainment, not discovery but rediscovery. The godly powers sought and dangerously won are revealed to have been within the heart of the hero all the time. He is the king's son, who has come to know who he is and therewith has entered into the exercise of his proper power, God's son, who has learned to know how much that title means. From this point of view the hero is symbolical of that divine creative and redemptive image which is hidden within us all, only waiting to be known and rendered into life. For the one who has become many, remains the one undivided, but each part is all of Christ, we read in the writings of Saint Simeon the Younger, A.D. 949-1022. I saw him in my house, the saint goes on. Among all those everyday things he appeared unexpectedly and became unutterably united and merged with me, and leapt over to me without anything in between, as fire to iron, as the light to glass. And he made me like fire and like light. And I became that which I saw before and beheld from afar. I do not know how to relate this miracle to you. I am man by nature, and God by the grace of God. 42. A comparable vision is described in the apocryphal Gospel of Eve. I stood on a lofty mountain and saw a gigantic man and another a dwarf, and I heard as it were a voice of thunder, and drew nigh for to hear, and he spake unto me and said, I am thou, and thou art I, and wheresoever thou mayest be I am there. In all am I scattered, and whensoever thou willest, thou gatherest me, and gathering me, thou gatherest thyself. 43. The two, the hero and his ultimate God, the seeker and the found, are thus understood as the outside and inside of a single, self-mirrored mystery, which is identical with the mystery of the manifest world. The great deed of the supreme hero is to come to the knowledge of this unity and multiplicity and then to make it known. Figure 8. Yggdrasil, the World Tree, Etching, Scandinavia, early 19th century A.D. 4. The World Navel. The effect of the successful adventure of the hero is the unlocking and release again of the flow of life into the body of the world. The miracle of this flow may be represented in physical terms as a circulation of food substance, dynamically as a streaming of energy, or spiritually as a manifestation of grace. Such varieties of image alternate easily, representing 3 degrees of condensation of the one life force. An abundant harvest is the sign of God's grace. God's grace is the food of the soul. The lightning bolt is the harbinger of fertilizing rain, and at the same time the manifestation of the released energy of God. Grace, food substance, energy. These pour into the living world, and wherever they fail, life decomposes into death. The torrent pours from an invisible source, the point of entry being the center of the symbolic circle of the universe, the immovable spot of the Buddha legend, 44, around which the world may be said to revolve. Beneath this spot is the earth's supporting head of the cosmic serpent, the dragon, symbolical of the waters of the abyss, which are the divine life creative energy and substance of the demiurge, the world generative aspect of immortal being, 45. The tree of life, i.e., the universe itself, grows from this point. It is rooted in the supporting darkness, the golden sunbird perches on its peak, a spring, the inexhaustible well, bubbles at its foot. Or the figure may be that of a cosmic mountain, with the city of the gods, like a lotus of light, upon its summit, and in its hollow the cities of the demons, illuminated by precious stones. Again, the figure may be that of the cosmic man or woman, for example the Buddha himself, or the dancing Hindu goddess Kali, seated or standing on this spot, or even fixed to the tree. Attis, Jesus, Woden. For the hero is the incarnation of God as himself the navel of the world, the umbilical point through which the energies of eternity break into time. Thus the world navel is the symbol of the continuous creation, the mystery of the maintenance of the world through that continuous miracle of vivification which wells within all things. Among the Pawnees of northern Kansas and southern Nebraska, the priest, during the ceremonial of the Hako, draws a circle with his toe. The circle represents a nest, such a priest is reported to have said. And it is drawn by the toe because the eagle builds its nest with its claws. Although we are imitating the bird making its nest, there is another meaning to the action. We are thinking of Tarawa making the world for the people to live in. If you go on a high hill and look around, you will see the sky touching the earth on every side, and within this circular enclosure the people live. So the circles we have made are not only nests, but they also represent the circle Tarawa Aishas has made for the dwelling place of all the people. The circles also stand for the kinship group, the clan, and the tribe. 46. The dome of heaven rests on the quarters of the earth, sometimes supported by 4 caryatidal kings, dwarfs, giants, elephants, or turtles. Hence, the traditional importance of the mathematical problem of the quadrature of the circle. It contains the secret of the transformation of heavenly into earthly forms. The hearth in the home, the altar in the temple, is the hub of the wheel of the earth, the womb of the universal mother whose fire is the fire of life. And the opening at the top of the lodge, or the crown, pinnacle, or lantern of the dome, is the hub or midpoint of the sky. The sun door, through which souls pass back from time to eternity, like the savor of the offerings, burned in the fire of life, and lifted on the axis of ascending smoke from the hub of the earthly to that of the celestial wheel. 47. Thus filled, the sun is the eating bowl of God, an inexhaustible grail, abundant with the substance of the sacrifice, whose flesh is meat indeed and whose blood is drink indeed. 48. At the same time it is the nourisher of mankind. The solar ray igniting the hearth symbolizes the communication of divine energy to the womb of the world, and is again the axis uniting and turning the two wheels. Through the sun door the circulation of energy is continuous. God descends and man ascends through it. I am the door. By me if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out, and find pasture. 49. He that eateth my flesh, and drinketh my blood, dwelleth in me, and I in him. 50. For a culture still nurtured in mythology, the landscape, as well as every phase of human existence, is made alive with symbolical suggestion. The hills and groves have their supernatural protectors and are associated with popularly known episodes in the local history of the creation of the world. Here and there, furthermore, are special shrines. Wherever a hero has been born, has wrought, or has passed back into the void, the place is marked and sanctified. A temple is erected there to signify and inspire the miracle of perfect centeredness, for this is the place of the breakthrough into abundance. Someone at this point discovered eternity. The site can serve, therefore, as a support for fruitful meditation. Such temples are designed, as a rule, to simulate the 4 directions of the world horizon, the shrine or altar at the center being symbolical of the inexhaustible point. The one who enters the temple compound and proceeds to the sanctuary is imitating the deed of the original hero. His aim is to rehearse the universal pattern as a means of evoking within himself the recollection of the life-centering, life-renewing form. Ancient cities are built like temples, having their portals to the 4 directions, while in the central place stands the major shrine of the divine city founder. The citizens live and work within the confines of this symbol. And in the same spirit, the domains of the national and world religions are centered around the hub of some mother city. Western Christendom around Rome, Islam around Mecca. The concerted bowing, 3 times a day, of the Mohammedan community throughout the world, all pointing like the spokes of a world-extensive wheel to the centering Kaaba, constructs a vast, living symbol of the submission, Islam, of each and all to Allah's will. For it is He, we read in the Quran, that will show you the truth of all that ye do. 51. Or again, a great temple can be established anywhere. Because, finally, the all is everywhere, and anywhere may become the seat of power. Any blade of grass may assume, in myth, the figure of the Savior and conduct the questing wanderer into the sanctum sanctorum of his own heart. Figure 9. Omphalos, gold file, Thracian, Bulgaria, 4th-3rd century B.C. The world navel, then, is ubiquitous. And since it is the source of all existence, it yields the world's plenitude of both good and evil. Ugliness and beauty, sin and virtue, pleasure and pain, are equally its production. To God all things are fair and good and right, declares Heraclitus, but men hold some things wrong and some right. 52. Hence the figures worshipped in the temples of the world are by no means always beautiful, always benign, or even necessarily virtuous. Like the deity of the Book of Job, they far transcend the scales of human value. And likewise, mythology does not hold as its greatest hero the merely virtuous man. Virtue is but the pedagogical prelude to the culminating insight, which goes beyond all pairs of opposites. Virtue quells the self-centered ego and makes the transpersonal centeredness possible, but when that has been achieved, what then of the pain or pleasure, vice or virtue, either of our own ego or of any other? Through all, the transcendent force is then perceived which lives in all is wonderful, and is worthy, in all, of our profound obeisance. For as Heraclitus has declared, the unlike is joined together, and from differences results the most beautiful harmony, and all things take place by strife. 53. Or again, as we have it from the poet Blake, the roaring of lions, the howling of wolves, the raging of the stormy sea, and the destructive sword, are portions of eternity too great for the eye of man. 54. The difficult point is made vivid in an anecdote from Yorubaland, West Africa, which is told of the trickster divinity Edshu. One day, this odd god came walking along a path between two fields. He beheld in either field a farmer at work and proposed to play the two a turn. He donned a hat that was on the one side red but on the other white, green before and black behind, these being the colors of the four world directions, i.e., Edshu was a personification of the center, the axis mundi, or the world navel, so that when the two friendly farmers had gone home to their village and the one had said to the other, "Did you see that old fellow go by today in the white hat?" The other replied, "Why, the hat was red." To which the first retorted, "It was not, it was white." "But it was red," insisted the friend, "I saw it with my own two eyes." "Well, you must be blind," declared the first. "You must be drunk," rejoined the other. And so the argument developed and the two came to blows. When they began to knife each other, they were brought by neighbors before the headman for judgment. Edshu was among the crowd at the trial, and when the headman sat at a loss to know where justice lay, the old trickster revealed himself, made known his prank, and showed the hat. The two could not help but quarrel, he said. "I wanted it that way. Spreading strife is my greatest joy." 55. Where the moralist would be filled with indignation and the tragic poet with pity and terror, mythology breaks the whole of life into a vast, horrendous divine comedy. Its Olympian laugh is not escapist in the least, but hard, with the hardness of life itself, which, we may take it, is the hardness of God, the Creator. Mythology, in this respect, makes the tragic attitude seem somewhat hysterical, and the merely moral judgment short-sighted. Yet the hardness is balanced by an assurance that all that we see is but the reflex of a power that endures, untouched by the pain. Thus the tales are both pitiless and terrorless, suffused with the joy of a transcendent anonymity regarding itself in all of the self-centered, battling egos that are born and die in time. Footnotes. Asterisk. It has been pointed out that the father also can be experienced as a protector and the mother, then, as a temptress. This is the way from Oedipus to Hamlet. "Oh God, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space, were it not that I have bad dreams." Hamlet 2. E. All neurotics, writes Dr. Freud, are either Oedipus or Hamlet. And as for the case of the daughter, which is one degree more complicated, the following passage will suffice for the present thumbnail exposition. "I dreamed last night that my father stabbed my mother in the heart. She died. I knew no one blamed him for what he did, although I was crying bitterly. The dream seemed to change, and he and I seemed to be going on a trip together, and I was very happy." This is the dream of an unmarried young woman of 24, Wood, Dreams, page 130. Asterisk. In such ceremonials as those of birth and burial, the significant effects are, of course, those experienced by the parents and relatives. All rites of passage are intended to touch not only the candidate but also every member of his circle. Asterisk. Compare Dante, Inferno, 14, 76-84, Dante Alighieri, The Divine Comedy, Volume I, page 89, a little brook, the redness of which still makes me shudder, which the sinful women share among them. Asterisk. Compare Dante, Purgatorio, 28, 22-30, Op. Cit, Volume 2, page 214, a stream, which with its little waves was bending toward the left the grass that sprang upon its bank. All the waters that are purest here on earth would seem to have some mixture in them, compared with that which hides nothing. Asterisk. Dante's Virgil. Asterisk. Those who in old times sang of the golden age, and of its happy state, perchance, upon Parnassus, dreamed of this place. Here was the root of mankind innocent. Here is always spring, and every fruit. This is the nectar of which each of them tells. Purgatorio, 28, 139-144, Op. Cit, Volume 2, page 219. Endnotes. 1. Clement Wood, Dreams. Their Meaning and Practical Application, New York, Greenberg, 1931, page 124. The dream material in this book, states the author, page V, is drawn primarily from the 1,000 and more dreams submitted to me each week for analysis, in connection with my daily feature syndicated throughout the newspapers of the country. This has been supplemented by dreams analyzed by me in my private practice. In contrast to most of the dreams presented in the standard works on the subject, those in this popular introduction to Freud come from people not undergoing analysis. They are remarkably ingenuous. 2. Geza Roheim, The Origin and Function of Culture, Nervous and Mental Disease Monographs, number 69, New York, 1943, pp. 17-25. 3. D.T. Burlingham, Die Einflung des Kleinkinds in Die Mutter, Imago, 21, page 429. Cited by Geza Roheim, War, Crime and the Covenant, Journal of Clinical Psychopathology, Monograph Series, number 1, Monticello, N.Y., 1945, page 1. 4. Roheim, War, Crime and the Covenant, page 3. 5. Freud, The Interpretation of Dreams, translated by James Strachey, Standard Edition, IV. London, The Hogarth Press, 1953, page 262. A Ridge, 1900. 6. Freud, 3 Essays on the Theory of Sexuality. 3. The Transformations of Puberty, translated by James Strachey, Standard Edition. 7. London, The Hogarth Press, 1953, page 208. A Ridge, 1905. 7. Sophocles, Oedipus Tyrannus, pp. 981-83. 8. Wood, Op. Cit. pp. 92-93. 9. A. Van Hennep, Les Rites de Passage, Paris, 1909. 10. Geza Roheim, The Eternal Ones of the Dream, New York, International Universities Press, 1945, page 178. 11. C. G. Jung, Symbols of Transformation, translated by R. F. C. Hull, Collected Works, Volume 5, New York and London, 2nd ed. 1967, par. 585. A Ridge, 1911-12, Wandlungen und Symbole der Libido, translated by Beatrice M. Hinkle as Psychology of the Unconscious, 1916. Revised by Jung, 1952. 12. Harold Peake and Herbert John Fleur, The Way of the Sea and Merchant Ventures in Bronze, New Haven, Connecticut, Yale University Press, 1929 and 1931. 13. Leo Frobenius, Das Unbekannte Afrika, Munich, Oscar Beck, 1923, pp. 10-11. 14. Ovid, Metamorphoses, 8, 132 ff. Ix, 736 ff. 15. T.S. Eliot, The Waste Land, New York, Harcourt, Brace and Company, London, Faber and Faber, 1922, pp. 340-45. 16. Arnold J. Toynbee, A Study of History, Oxford University Press, 1934, Volume V, pp. 169-75. 17. Forms or images of a collective nature which occur practically all over the earth as constituents of myths and at the same time as autochthonous, individual products of unconscious origin. C. G. Jung, Psychology and Religion, Collected Works, Volume 11, New York and London, 1958, par. 88. A Ridge, written in English, 1937. See also his Psychological Types, Index. 18. Jung, Psychology and Religion, par. 89. 19. Friedrich Nietzsche, Human, All Too Human, Volume I, page 13, cited by Jung, Psychology and Religion, par. 89, n. 17. 20. Adolf Bastian, Ethnische Elementargedanken in der Lehre vom Menschen, Berlin, 1895, Volume I, page X. 21. Franz Boas, The Mind of Primitive Man, 1911, pp. 104, 155, 228. 22. James G. Fraser, The Golden Bough, 1-volume edition, page 386. Copyright 1922 by the Macmillan Company and used with their permission. 23. Sigmund Freud, The Interpretation of Dreams, translated by James Strachey, Standard Edition, v. pp. 350-51. 24. Jung, Psychology and Religion, par. 89. 25. This is Geza Roheim's translation of an Australian Aranda term, Altchiranga Mijina, which refers to the mythical ancestors who wandered on the earth in the time called Altchiranga Nikala, ancestor was. The word Altira means a dream, b, ancestor, beings who appear in the dream, c, a story. Roheim, The Eternal Ones of the Dream, pp. 210-11. 26. Frederick Pierce, Dreams and Personality, copyright 1931 by D. Appleton and Company, publishers, pp. 108-9. 27. Words Written Over the Gate of Hell. Per me si va nella città dolente. Per me si va nel eterno dolore. Per me si va tra la perduta gente. Dante, Inferno, 3, 1-3. The translation is by Charles Eliot Norton, The Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri, Boston and New York, Houghton Mifflin Company, 1902. This and the other quotations listed in footnotes used by permission of the publishers. 28. Katha Upanishad, 3-14. Unless otherwise noted, my quotations of the Upanishads will be taken from Robert Ernest Hume, The 13 Principal Upanishads, translated from the Sanskrit, Oxford University Press, 1931. The Upanishads are a class of Hindu treatises on the nature of man and the universe, forming a late part of the orthodox tradition of speculation. The earliest date from about the 8th century B.C. 29. James Joyce, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, New York. The Modern Library, Random House, Inc., page 239. 30. Aristotle, On the Art of Poetry, translated by Ingram Bywater, with a preface by Gilbert Murray, Oxford University Press, 1920, pp. 14-16. 31. Robinson Jeffers, Roan Stallion, New York. Horace Liveright, 1925, page 20. 32. Euripides, Bacchae, page 1017, translated by Gilbert Murray. 33. Euripides, The Cretans, FRG, 475, AP. Porphyry, De Abstinentia, IV, page 19, trans. Gilbert Murray. See discussion of this verse by Jane Harrison, Prolegomena to a Study of Greek Religion, 3rd edition, Cambridge University Press, 1992, pp. 478-500. 34. Ovid, Metamorphoses, 15, 165-67, 184-85. Translation by Frank Justice Miller, The Loeb Classical Library. 35. Bhagavad Gita, 218. Translation by Swami Nikhilananda, New York, 1944. 36. The word monomyth is from James Joyce, Finnegan's Wake, New York, Viking Press, Inc., 1939, page 581. 37. Virgil, Aeneid, v., page 892. 38. Greatly abridged from Jataka, Introduction, I, pp. 58-75. Translated by Henry Clark Warren, Buddhism in Translations, Harvard Oriental Series 3, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard University Press, 1896, pp. 56-87, and the Lalita Vistara as rendered by Ananda K. Kumaraswamy, Buddha and the Gospel of Buddhism, New York, G. P. Putnam's Sons, 1916, pp. 24-38. 39. Exodus, 19, 3-5. 40. Louis Ginsberg, The Legends of the Jews, Philadelphia, The Jewish Publication Society of America, 1911, Volume 3, pp. 90-94. 41. The present volume is not concerned with the historical discussion of this circumstance. That task is reserved for a work now under preparation. The work mentioned would eventually become Campbell's 4-part opus, The Masks of God, ed. The present volume is a comparative, not genetic, study. Its purpose is to show that essential parallels exist in the myths themselves as well as in the interpretations and applications that the sages have announced for them. 42. Translated by Dom Ansgar Nelson, OSB, in The Soul of Fire, New York, Pantheon Books, 1944, page 303. 43. Quoted by Epiphanius, Adversus Heresies, XXVI, 3. 44. C. The Great Struggle of the Buddha. 45. This is the serpent that protected the Buddha, the first week after his enlightenment. C. The King of Serpents. 46. Alice C. Fletcher, The Hako. Apani Ceremony, 22nd Annual Report, Bureau of American Ethnology, Part 2. Washington, D.C., 1904, pp. 243-44. At the creation of the world, Apani High Priest said to Miss Fletcher, in explanation of the divinities honored in the ceremony, it was arranged that there should be lesser powers. Turawa Aetius, the mighty power, could not come near to man, could not be seen or felt by him, therefore lesser powers were permitted. They were to mediate between man and Turawa, Ibid, page 27. 47. See Ananda K. Kumaraswamy, Symbolism of the Dome, The Indian Historical Quarterly, Volume 14, Number 1. March 1938. 48. John, 655. 49. Ibid, 10-9. 50. Ibid, 656. 51. Koran, 5-105. 52. Heraclitus, Fragment 102. 53. Heraclitus, Fragment 46. 54. William Blake, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, Proverbs of Hell. 55. Leo Frobenius, Und Afrika Sprach, Berlin. Vita, Deutsches Verlaghaus, 1912. pp. 243-45. Compare the strikingly similar episode recounted of Othin, Woden, in the Prose Edda, Skaldskaparmal, I, Scandinavian Classics, Volume V, New York, 1929, page 96. Compare also Jehovah's command in Exodus, 32-27. Put every man his sword by his side, and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. Part I. The Adventure of the Hero. Figure 10. Psyche entering Cupid's garden, oil on canvas, England, A. D. 1903. Chapter I. Departure 1. The Call to Adventure. Long, long ago, when wishing still could lead to something, there lived a king whose daughters all were beautiful, but the youngest was so beautiful that the sun itself, who had seen so many things, simply marveled every time it shone on her face. Now close to the castle of this king was a great dark forest, and in the forest under an old lime tree a spring, and when the day was very hot, the king's child would go out into the wood and sit on the edge of the cool spring. And to pass the time she would take a golden ball, toss it up and catch it, and this was her favorite plaything. Now it so happened one day that the golden ball of the princess did not fall into the little hand lifted into the air, but passed it, bounced on the ground, and rolled directly into the water. The princess followed it with her eyes, but the ball disappeared, and the spring was deep, so deep that the bottom could not be seen. Thereupon she began to cry, and her crying became louder and louder, and she was unable to find consolation. And while she was lamenting in this way, she heard someone call to her, "What is the matter, princess? You are crying so hard, a stone would be forced to pity you." She looked around to see where the voice had come from, and there she beheld a frog, holding its fat, ugly head out of the water. "Oh, it's you, old waterplopper," she said. "I am crying over my golden ball, which has fallen into the spring." "Be calm, don't cry," answered the frog. "I can surely be of assistance. But what will you give me if I fetch your toy for you?" "Whatever you would like to have, dear frog," she said. "My clothes, my pearls and jewels, even the golden crown that I wear." The frog replied, "Your clothes, your pearls and jewels, and your golden crown, I do not want, but if you will care for me and let me be your companion and playmate, let me sit beside you at your little table, eat from your little golden plate, drink from your little cup, sleep in your little bed. If you will promise me that, I will go straight down and fetch your golden ball." "All right," she said. "I promise you anything you want, if you will only bring me back the ball." But she thought, how that simple frog chatters. There he sits in the water with his own kind, and could never be the companion of a human being. As soon as the frog had obtained her promise, he ducked his head and sank, and after a little while came swimming up again. He had the ball in his mouth, and tossed it on the grass. The princess was elated when she saw her pretty toy. She picked it up and scampered away. "Wait, wait," called the frog, "take me along, I can't run like you." But what good did it do, though he croaked after her as loudly as he could? She paid not the slightest heed, but hurried home, and soon had completely forgotten the poor frog, who must have hopped back again into his spring. 1. This is an example of one of the ways in which the adventure can begin. A blunder, apparently the merest chance, reveals an unsuspected world, and the individual is drawn into a relationship with forces that are not rightly understood. As Freud has shown, too, blunders are not the merest chance. They are the result of suppressed desires and conflicts. They are ripples on the surface of life, produced by unsuspected springs. And these may be very deep as the soul itself. The blunder may amount to the opening of a destiny. Thus it happens, in this fairy tale, that the disappearance of the ball is the first sign of something coming for the princess, the frog is the second, and the unconsidered promise is the third. As a preliminary manifestation of the powers that are breaking into play, the frog, coming up as it were by miracle, can be termed the herald. The crisis of his appearance is the call to adventure. The herald's summons may be to live, as in the present instance, or, at a later moment of the biography, to die. It may sound the call to some high historical undertaking, or it may mark the dawn of religious illumination. As apprehended by the mystic, it marks what has been termed the awakening of the self. 3. In the case of the princess of the fairy tale, it signified no more than the coming of adolescence. But whether small or great, and no matter what the stage or grade of life, the call rings up the curtain, always, on a mystery of transfiguration, a rite, or moment, of spiritual passage, which, when complete, amounts to a dying and a birth. The familiar life horizon has been outgrown. The old concepts, ideals, and emotional patterns no longer fit. The time for the passing of a threshold is at hand. Figure 11. APIs in the form of a bull transports the deceased as Osiris to the underworld, carved wood, Egypt, circa 700 to 650 B.C. Typical of the circumstances of the call are the dark forest, the great tree, the babbling spring, and the loathly, underestimated appearance of the carrier of the power of destiny. We recognize in the scene the symbols of the world navel. The frog, the little dragon, is the nursery counterpart of the underworld serpent whose head supports the earth and who represents the life progenitive, demiurgic powers of the abyss. He comes up with the golden sunball, his dark deep waters having just taken it down. At this moment resembling the great Chinese dragon of the east, delivering the rising sun in his jaws, or the frog on whose head rides the handsome young immortal, Han Sang, carrying in a basket the peaches of immortality. Freud has suggested that all moments of anxiety reproduce the painful feelings of the first separation from the mother, the tightening of the breath, congestion of the blood, etc., of the crisis of birth. 4. Conversely, all moments of separation and new birth produce anxiety. Whether it be the king's child about to be taken from the felicity of her established dual unity with King Daddy, or God's daughter Eve, now ripe to depart from the idol of the garden, or again, the supremely concentrated future Buddha breaking past the last horizons of the created world, the same archetypal images are activated, symbolizing danger, reassurance, trial, passage, and the strange holiness of the mysteries of birth. The disgusting and rejected frog or dragon of the fairy tale brings up the sunball in its mouth. For the frog, the serpent, the rejected one, is the representative of that unconscious deep, so deep that the bottom cannot be seen, wherein are hoarded all of the rejected, unadmitted, unrecognized, unknown, or undeveloped factors, laws, and elements of existence. Those are the pearls of the fabled submarine palaces of the Nixies, Tritons, and Water Guardians, the jewels that give light to the demon cities of the underworld, the fire seeds in the ocean of immortality which supports the earth and surrounds it like a snake, the stars in the bosom of immortal night. Those are the nuggets in the gold hoard of the dragon, the guarded apples of the Hesperides, the filaments of the golden fleece. The herald or announcer of the adventure, therefore, is often dark, loathly, or terrifying, judged evil by the world. Yet if one could follow, the way would be opened through the walls of day into the dark where the jewels glow. Or the herald is a beast, as in the fairy tale, representative of the repressed instinctual fecundity within ourselves, or again a veiled mysterious figure, the unknown. The story is told, for example, of King Arthur, and how he made him ready with many knights to ride a hunting. As soon as he was in the forest, the king saw a great hart afore him. "This hart will I chase," said King Arthur, and so he spurred the horse and rode after long, and so by fine force he was like to have smitten the hart. Whereas the king had chased the hart so long, that his horse lost his breath, and fell down dead. Then a yeoman fetched the king another horse. So the king saw the hart ambushed, and his horse dead. He set him down by a fountain, and there he fell in great thoughts. And as he sat so, him thought he heard a noise of hounds, to the sum of 30. And with that the king saw coming toward him the strangest beast that ever he saw or heard of. So the beast went to the well and drank, and the noise was in the beast's belly like unto the questing of 30 couple hounds. But all the while the beast drank there was no noise in the beast's belly. And therewith the beast departed with a great noise, whereof the king had great marvel. 5. Figure 12. Isis in the form of a hawk joins Osiris in the underworld, carved stone, Ptolemaic, Egypt, circa 1st century A.D. Or we have the case, from a very different portion of the world, of an Arapaho girl of the North American plains. She spied a porcupine near a cottonwood tree. She tried to hit the animal, but it ran behind the tree and began to climb. The girl started after, to catch it, but it continued just out of reach. "Well," she said, "I am climbing to catch the porcupine, for I want those quills, and if necessary I will go to the top." The porcupine reached the top of the tree, but as she approached and was about to lay hands on it, the cottonwood tree suddenly lengthened, and the porcupine resumed his climb. Looking down, she saw her friends craning up at her and beckoning her to descend. But having passed under the influence of the porcupine, and fearful for the great distance between herself and the ground, she continued to mount the tree, until she became the merest speck to those looking from below, and with the porcupine she finally reached the sky. 6. 2 dreams will suffice to illustrate the spontaneous appearance of the figure of the herald in the psyche that is ripe for transformation. The first is the dream of a young man seeking the way to a new world orientation. "I am in a green land where many sheep are at pasture." It is the land of sheep. In the land of sheep stands an unknown woman and points the way. 7. The second is the dream of a young girl whose girl companion has lately died of consumption. She is afraid that she may have the disease herself. "I was in a blossoming garden. The sun was just going down with a blood-red glow. Then there appeared before me a black, noble knight, who spoke to me with a very serious, deep and frightening voice. 'Wilt thou go with me?' Without attending my answer, he took me by the hand, and carried me away." 8. Whether dream or myth, in these adventures there is an atmosphere of irresistible fascination about the figure that appears suddenly as guide, marking a new period, a new stage, in the biography. That which has to be faced, and is somehow profoundly familiar to the unconscious, though unknown, surprising, and even frightening to the conscious personality, makes itself known, and what formerly was meaningful may become strangely emptied of value. Like the world of the king's child, with the sudden disappearance into the well of the golden ball. Thereafter, even though the hero returns for a while to his familiar occupations, they may be found unfruitful. A series of signs of increasing force then will become visible until, as in the following legend of the 4 signs, which is the most celebrated example of the call to adventure in the literature of the world, the summons can no longer be denied. The young prince Gautama Sakyamuni, the future Buddha, had been protected by his father from all knowledge of age, sickness, death, or monkhood, lest he should be moved to thoughts of life renunciation. For it had been prophesied at his birth that he was to become either a world emperor or a Buddha. The king, prejudiced in favor of the royal vocation, provided his son with 3 palaces and 40,000 dancing girls to keep his mind attached to the world. But these only served to advance the inevitable, for while still relatively young, the youth exhausted for himself the fields of fleshly joy and became ripe for the other experience. The moment he was ready, the proper heralds automatically appeared. Now on a certain day the future Buddha wished to go to the park, and told his charioteer to make ready the chariot. Accordingly the man brought out a sumptuous and elegant chariot, and, adorning it richly, he harnessed to it 4 state horses of the Sindhava breed, as white as the petals of the white lotus, and announced to the future Buddha that everything was ready. And the future Buddha mounted the chariot, which was like to a palace of the gods, and proceeded toward the park. The time for the enlightenment of the prince Siddhartha draweth nigh, thought the gods. We must show him a sign. And they changed one of their number into a decrepit old man, broken-toothed, gray-haired, crooked and bent of body, leaning on a staff, and trembling, and showed him to the future Buddha, but so that only he and the charioteer saw him. Then said the future Buddha to the charioteer, "Friend, pray, who is this man? Even his hair is not like that of other men." And when he heard the answer, he said, "Shame on birth, since to everyone that is born old age must come." And agitated in heart, he thereupon returned and ascended his palace. "Why has my son returned so quickly?" asked the king. "Sire, he has seen an old man," was the reply, "and because he has seen an old man, he is about to retire from the world." "Do you want to kill me, that you say such things? Quickly get ready some plays to be performed before my son. If we can but get him to enjoying pleasure, he will cease to think of retiring from the world." Then the king extended the guard to half a league in each direction. Again on a certain day, as the future Buddha was going to the park, he saw a diseased man whom the gods had fashioned, and having again made inquiry, he returned, agitated in heart, and ascended his palace. And the king made the same inquiry and gave the same order as before, and again extending the guard, placed them for 3/4 of a league around. And again on a certain day, as the future Buddha was going to the park, he saw a dead man whom the gods had fashioned, and having again made inquiry, he returned, agitated in heart, and ascended his palace. And the king made the same inquiry and gave the same orders as before, and again extending the guard placed them for a league around. And again on a certain day, as the future Buddha was going to the park, he saw a monk, carefully and decently clad, whom the gods had fashioned. And he asked his charioteer, "Pray, who is this man?" "Sire, this is one who has retired from the world." And the charioteer thereupon proceeded to sound the praises of retirement from the world. The thought of retiring from the world was a pleasing one to the future Buddha. 9. This first stage of the mythological journey, which we have designated the call to adventure, signifies that destiny has summoned the hero and transferred his spiritual center of gravity from within the pale of his society to a zone unknown. This fateful region of both treasure and danger may be variously represented as a distant land, a forest, a kingdom underground, beneath the waves, or above the sky, a secret island, lofty mountaintop, or profound dream state. But it is always a place of strangely fluid and polymorphous beings, unimaginable torments, superhuman deeds, and impossible delight. The hero can go forth of his own volition to accomplish the adventure, as did Theseus when he arrived in his father's city, Athens, and heard the horrible history of the Minotaur. Or he may be carried or sent abroad by some benign or malignant agent, as was Odysseus, driven about the Mediterranean by the winds of the angered god Poseidon. The adventure may begin as a mere blunder, as did that of the princess of the fairy tale. Or still again, one may be only casually strolling, when some passing phenomenon catches the wandering eye and lures one away from the frequented paths of man. Examples might be multiplied, ad infinitum, from every corner of the world. In the above section, and throughout the following pages, I have made no attempt to exhaust the evidence. To have done so, after the manner, for example, of Fraser, in The Golden Bough, would have enlarged my chapters prodigiously without making the main line of the monomyth any clearer. Instead, I am giving in each section a few striking examples from a number of widely scattered, representative traditions. During the course of the work I shift my sources gradually, so that the reader may savor the peculiar qualities of the various styles. By the time he comes to the last page, he will have reviewed an immense number of mythologies. Should he wish to prove whether all might have been cited for every section of the monomyth, he need only turn to some of the source volumes enumerated in the bibliography and ramble through a few of the multitude of tales. 2. Refusal of the call. Often in actual life, and not infrequently in the myths and popular tales, we encounter the dull case of the call unanswered, for it is always possible to turn the ear to other interests. Refusal of the summons converts the adventure into its negative. Walled in boredom, hard work, or culture, the subject loses the power of significant affirmative action and becomes a victim to be saved. His flowering world becomes a wasteland of dry stones and his life feels meaningless, even though, like King Minos, he may through titanic effort succeed in building an empire of renown. Whatever house he builds, it will be a house of death, a labyrinth of cyclopean walls to hide from him his Minotaur. All he can do is create new problems for himself and await the gradual approach of his disintegration. Because I have called, and ye refuse. I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. When your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind, when distress and anguish cometh upon you. For the turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. 10. Time Jesum transintem et non revertentem. Dread the passage of Jesus, for he does not return. 11. The myths and folktales of the whole world make clear that the refusal is essentially a refusal to give up what one takes to be one's own interest. The future is regarded not in terms of an unremitting series of deaths and births, but as though one's present system of ideals, virtues, goals, and advantages were to be fixed and made secure. King Minos retained the divine bull, when the sacrifice would have signified submission to the will of the god of his society, for he preferred what he conceived to be his economic advantage. Thus he failed to advance into the life role that he had assumed, and we have seen with what calamitous effect. The divinity itself became his terror, for, obviously, if one is oneself one's god, then God himself, the will of God, the power that would destroy one's egocentric system, becomes a monster. I fled him, down the nights and down the days. I fled him, down the arches of the years. I fled him, down the labyrinthine ways of my own mind, and in the mist of tears. I hid from him, and under running laughter. 12. One is harassed, both day and night, by the divine being that is the image of the living self within the locked labyrinth of one's own disoriented psyche. The ways to the gates have all been lost, there is no exit. One can only cling, like Satan, furiously, to oneself and be in hell, or else break, and be annihilated at last, in God. Ah, fondest, blindest, weakest. I am he whom thou seekest. Thou dravest love from thee, who dravest me. 13. The same harrowing, mysterious voice was to be heard in the call of the Greek Apollo to the fleeing maiden Daphne, daughter of the river Peneus, as he pursued her over the plain. O nymph, O Peneus's daughter, stay. The deity called to her, like the frog to the princess of the fairy tale. I who pursue thee am no enemy. Thou knowest not whom thou fleest, and for that reason dost thou flee. Run with less speed, I pray, and hold thy flight. I, too, will follow with less speed. Nay, stop and ask who thy lover is. He would have said more, the story goes, but the maiden pursued her frightened way and left him with words unfinished, even in her desertion seeming fair. The winds bared her limbs, the opposing breezes set her garments aflutter as she ran, and a light air flung her locks streaming behind her. Her beauty was enhanced by flight. But the chase drew to an end, for the youthful god would not longer waste his time in coaxing words, and, urged on by love, he pursued at utmost speed. Just as when a Gallic hound has seen a hare in an open plain, and seeks his prey on flying feet, but the hare, safety, he, just about to fasten on her, even now thinks he has her, and grazes her very heels with his outstretched muzzle. But she knows not whether or not she be already caught, and barely escapes from those sharp fangs and leaves behind the jaws just closing on her. So ran the god and maid, he sped by hope and she by fear. But he ran the more swiftly, borne on the wings of love, gave her no time to rest, hung over her fleeing shoulders and breathed on the hair that streamed over her neck. Now was her strength all gone, and, pale with fear and utterly overcome by the toil of her swift flight, seeing the waters of her father's river near, she cried, O Father, help! If your waters hold divinity, change and destroy this beauty by which I pleased o'er well. Scarce had she thus prayed when a down-dragging numbness seized her limbs, and her soft sides were begirt with thin bark. Her hair was changed to leaves, her arms to branches. Her feet, but now so swift, grew fast in sluggish roots, and her head was now but a tree's top. Her gleaming beauty alone remained. 14. Figure 13. Apollo and Daphne, carved ivory, Coptic, Egypt, 5th century A.D. This is indeed a dull and unrewarding finish. Apollo, the sun, the lord of time and ripeness, no longer pressed his frightening suit, but instead, simply named the laurel his favorite tree and ironically recommended its leaves to the fashioners of victory wreaths. The girl had retreated to the image of her parent and there found protection, like the unsuccessful husband whose dream of mother love preserved him from the state of cleaving to a wife. 15. The literature of psychoanalysis abounds in examples of such desperate fixations. What they represent is an impotence to put off the infantile ego, with its sphere of emotional relationships and ideals. One is bound in by the walls of childhood. The father and mother stand as threshold guardians, and the timorous soul, fearful of some punishment, fails to make the passage through the door and come to birth in the world without. Dr. Jung has reported a dream that resembles very closely the image of the myth of Daphne. The dreamer is the same young man who found himself, see above, in the land of the sheep, the land, that is to say, of unindependence. A voice within him says, I must first get away from the father, then a few nights later. A snake draws a circle about the dreamer, and he stands like a tree, grown fast to the earth. 16. This is an image of the magic circle drawn about the personality by the dragon power of the fixating parent. Brynhild, in the same way, was protected in her virginity, arrested in her daughter state for years, by the circle of the fire of All-Father. Woden, she slept in timelessness until the coming of Siegfried. Little Briar Rose, Sleeping Beauty, was put to sleep by a jealous hag, an unconscious evil mother image. And not only the child, her entire world went off to sleep, but at last, after long, long years, there came a prince to wake her. The king and queen, the conscious good parent images, who had just come home and were entering the hall, began to fall asleep, and with them the whole estate. All the horses slept in the stalls, the dogs in the yard, the pigeons on the roof, the flies on the walls, yes, the fire that flickered on the hearth grew still and slumbered, and the roast ceased to simmer. And the cook, who was about to pull the hair of the scullery boy because he had forgotten something, let him go and fell off to sleep. And the wind went down, and not a leaf stirred in the trees. Then around the castle a hedge of thorns began to grow, which became taller every year, and finally shut off the whole estate. It grew up taller than the castle, so that nothing more was seen, not even the weathercock on the roof. 17. A Persian city once was, instant to stone, king and queen, soldiers, inhabitants, and all, because its people refused the call of Allah. 18. Lot's wife became a pillar of salt for looking back, when she had been summoned forth from her city by Jehovah. 19. And there is the tale of the wandering Jew, cursed to remain on earth until the day of judgment, because when Christ had passed him carrying the cross, this man among the people standing along the way called, Go faster. A little speed. The unrecognized, insulted Savior turned and said to him, I go, but you shall be waiting here for me when I return. 20. Some of the victims remain spellbound forever, at least, so far as we are told, but others are destined to be saved. Brynhild was preserved for her proper hero and Little Briar Rose was rescued by a prince. Also, the young man transformed into a tree dreamed subsequently of the unknown woman who pointed the way, as a mysterious guide to paths unknown. 21. Not all who hesitate are lost. The psyche has many secrets in reserve, and these are not disclosed unless required. So it is that sometimes the predicament following an obstinate refusal of the call proves to be the occasion of a providential revelation of some unsuspected principle of release. Willed introversion, in fact, is one of the classic implements of creative genius and can be employed as a deliberate device. It drives the psychic energies into depth and activates the lost continent of unconscious infantile and archetypal images. The result, of course, may be a disintegration of consciousness more or less complete, neurosis, psychosis. The plight of spellbound Daphne. But on the other hand, if the personality is able to absorb and integrate the new forces, there will be experienced an almost superhuman degree of self-consciousness and masterful control. This is a basic principle of the Indian disciplines of yoga. It has been the way, also, of many creative spirits in the West. 22. It cannot be described, quite, as an answer to any specific call. Rather, it is a deliberate, terrific refusal to respond to anything but the deepest, highest, richest answer to the as yet unknown demand of some waiting void within. A kind of total strike, or rejection of the offered terms of life, as a result of which some power of transformation carries the problem to a plane of new magnitudes, where it is suddenly and finally resolved. This is the aspect of the hero problem illustrated in the wondrous Arabian Nights adventure of the Prince Kamar al-Zaman and the Princess Budr. The young and handsome prince, the only son of King Shahriman of Persia, persistently refused the repeated suggestions, requests, demands, and finally injunctions, of his father, that he should do the normal thing and take to himself a wife. The first time the subject was broached to him, the lad responded, "O my father, know that I have no lust to marry nor doth my soul incline to women. For that concerning their craft and perfidy I have read many books and heard much talk, even as saith the poet. Now, and of women ask ye, I reply. In their affairs I'm versed a doctor rare. When man's head grizzles and his money dwindles, in their affection he hath naught for share." And another said, "Rebel against women and so shalt thou serve Allah the more. The youth who gives women the rein must forfeit all hope to soar. They'll balk him when seeking the strange device, Excelsior. Though, waste he 1,000 of years in the study of science and lore." And when he had ended his verses he continued, "O my father, wedlock is a thing whereto I will never consent. No, not though I drink the cup of death." When the Sultan Shahriman heard these words from his son, light became darkness in his sight and he was full of grief. Yet, for the great love he bore him, he was unwilling to repeat his wishes and was not angry, but showed him all manner of kindness. After a year, the father pressed again his question, but the youth persisted in refusal, with further stanzas from the poets. The king consulted with his wazir, and the minister advised, "O king, wait another year and, if after that thou be minded to speak to him on the matter of marriage, speak not to him privily, but address him on a day of state, when all the emirs and wazirs are present with the whole of the army standing before thee. And when all are in crowd then send for thy son, Kamar al-Zaman, and summon him, and, when he cometh, broach to him the matter of marriage before the wazirs and grandees and officers of state and captains, for he will surely be bashful and daunted by their presence and will not dare to oppose thy will." When the moment came, however, and King Shahriman gave his command before the state, the prince bowed his head a while, then raising it towards his father, and, being moved by youthful folly and boyish ignorance, replied, "But for myself I will never marry, no, not though I drink the cup of death. As for thee, thou art great in age and small of wit. Hast thou not, twice ere this day and before this occasion, questioned me of the matter of marriage, and I refused my consent? Indeed thou dottest and art not fit to govern a flock of sheep." So saying, Kamar al-Zaman unclasped his hands from behind his back and tucked up his sleeves above his elbows before his father, being in a fit of fury. Moreover, he added many words to his sire, knowing not what he said, in the trouble of his spirits. The king was confounded and ashamed, since this befell in the presence of his grandees and soldier officers assembled on a high festival and state occasion. But presently the majesty of kingship took him, and he cried out at his son and made him tremble. Then he called to the guards standing before him and commanded, "Seize him." So they came forward and laid hands on him and, binding him, brought him before his sire, who bade them pinion his elbows behind his back and in this guise make him stand before the presence. And the prince bowed down his head for fear and apprehension, and his brow and face were beaded and spangled with sweat, and shame and confusion troubled him sorely. Thereupon his father abused him and reviled him and cried, "Woe to thee, thou son of adultery and nursling of abomination! How durst thou answer me in this wise before my captains and soldiers? But hitherto none hath chastised thee. Knowest thou not that this deed thou hast done were a disgrace to him had it been done by the meanest of my subjects?" And the king ordered his Mamluks to loose his elbow bonds and imprison him in one of the bastions of the citadel. So they took the prince and thrust him into an old tower in which there was a dilapidated salon, and in its midst a ruined well, after having first swept it and cleansed its floor rags and set therein a couch on which they laid a mattress, a leathern rug, and a cushion. And then they brought a great lantern and a wax candle, for that place was dark, even by day. And lastly the Mamelukes led Kamar al-Zaman thither, and stationed a eunuch at the door. And when all this was done, the prince threw himself on the couch, sad-spirited and heavy-hearted, blaming himself and repenting of his injurious conduct to his father. Meanwhile in the distant empire of China, the daughter of King Gazar, lord of the islands and the seas and the 7 palaces, was in like case. When her beauty had become known and her name and fame been bruited abroad in the neighboring countries, all the kings had sent to her father to demand her of him in marriage, and he had consulted her on the matter, but she had disliked the very word wedlock. "O my father," she had answered, "I have no mind to marry, no, not at all, for I am a sovereign lady and a queen suzerain ruling over men, and I have no desire for a man who shall rule over me." And the more suits she refused, the more her suitors' eagerness increased, and all the royalties of the inner islands of China sent presents and rarities to her father with letters asking her in marriage. So he pressed her again and again with advice on the matter of espousals, but she ever opposed to him refusals, till at last she turned upon him angrily and cried, "O my father, if thou name matrimony to me once more, I will go into my chamber and take a sword and, fixing its hilt on the ground, will set its point to my waist. Then will I press upon it, till it come forth from my back, and so slay myself." Now when the king heard these words, the light became darkness in his sight, and his heart burned for her as with a flame of fire, because he feared lest she should kill herself, and he was filled with perplexity concerning her affair and the king's her suitors. So he said to her, "If thou be determined not to marry and there be no help for it, abstain from going and coming in and out." Then he placed her in a house and shut her up in a chamber, appointing 10 old women as duennas to guard her, and forbade her to go forth to the 7 palaces. Moreover, he made it appear that he was incensed against her, and sent letters to all the kings, giving them to know that she had been stricken with madness by the jinn. 23. With the hero and the heroine both following the negative way, and between them the continent of Asia, it will require a miracle to consummate the union of this eternally predestined pair. Whence can such a power come to break the life-negating spell and dissolve the wrath of the 2 childhood fathers? The reply to this question would remain the same throughout the mythologies of the world. For, as is written so frequently in the sacred pages of the Koran, well able is Allah to save. The sole problem is what the machinery of the miracle is to be. And that is a secret to be opened only in the following stages of this Arabian Nights entertainment. 3. Supernatural aid for those who have not refused the call. The first encounter of the hero journey is with a protective figure, often a little old crone or old man, who provides the adventurer with amulets against the dragon forces he is about to pass. An East African tribe, for example, the Wachaga of Tanganyika, tell of a very poor man named Kayazimba who set out in desperation for the land where the sun rises. And he had traveled long and grown tired, and was simply standing, looking hopelessly in the direction of his search, when he heard someone approaching from behind. He turned and perceived a decrepit little woman. She came up and wished to know his business. When he had told her, she wrapped her garment around him, and, soaring from the earth, transported him to the zenith, where the sun pauses in the middle of the day. Then with a mighty din a great company of men came from eastward to that place, and in the midst of them was a brilliant chieftain, who, when he had arrived, slaughtered an ox and sat down to feast with his retainers. The old woman asked his help for Kayazimba. The chieftain blessed the man and sent him home. And it is recorded that he lived in prosperity ever after. 24. Among the American Indians of the Southwest, the favorite personage in this benignant role is Spider-Woman, a grandmotherly little dame who lives underground. The twin war gods of the Navajo, on the way to the house of their father, the sun, had hardly departed from their home, following a holy trail, when they came upon this wonderful little figure. The boys traveled rapidly in the holy trail, and soon after sunrise, near Desilnaudil, saw smoke arising from the ground. They went to the place where the smoke rose, and they found it came from the smoke hole of a subterranean chamber. A ladder, black from smoke, projected through the hole. Looking down into the chamber, they saw an old woman, the Spider-Woman, who glanced up at them and said, "Welcome, children. Enter. Who are you, and whence do you come together walking?" They made no answer, but descended the ladder. When they reached the floor, she again spoke to them, asking, "Whither do you two go walking together?" "Nowhere in particular," they answered. "We came here because we had nowhere else to go." She asked this question 4 times, and each time she received a similar answer. Then she said, "Perhaps you would seek your father?" "Yes," they answered, "if we only knew the way to his dwelling." "Ah," said the woman, "it is a long and dangerous way to the house of your father, the sun. There are many monsters dwelling between here and there, and perhaps, when you get there, your father may not be glad to see you, and may punish you for coming. You must pass 4 places of danger: the rocks that crush the traveler, the reeds that cut him to pieces, the cane cactuses that tear him to pieces, and the boiling sands that overwhelm him. But I shall give you something to subdue your enemies and preserve your lives." She gave them a charm called Feather of the Alien Gods, which consisted of a hoop with 2 life feathers, feathers plucked from a living eagle, attached, and another life feather to preserve their existence. She taught them also this magic formula, which, if repeated to their enemies, would subdue their anger. Put your feet down with pollen. Put your hands down with pollen. Put your head down with pollen. Then your feet are pollen. Your hands are pollen. Your body is pollen. Your mind is pollen. Your voice is pollen. The trail is beautiful. Be still. 25. Figure 14. The rocks that crush, the reeds that cut, sand painting, Navajo, North America, A.D. 1943. The helpful crone and fairy godmother is a familiar feature of European fairy lore. In Christian saints' legends, the role is commonly played by the Virgin. The Virgin by her intercession can win the mercy of the Father. Spider-Woman with her web can control the movements of the sun. The hero who has come under the protection of the cosmic mother cannot be harmed. The thread of Ariadne brought Theseus safely through the adventure of the labyrinth. This is the guiding power that runs through the work of Dante in the female figures of Beatrice and the Virgin, and appears in Goethe's Faust successively as Gretchen, Helen of Troy, and the Virgin. Thou art the living fount of hope, praised Dante, at the end of his safe passage through the perils of the three worlds. Lady, thou art so great and so availest, that whoso would have grace, and has not recourse to thee, would have his desire fly without wings. Thy benignity not only succors him who asks, but oftentimes freely foreruns the asking. In thee mercy, in thee pity, in thee magnificence, in thee whatever of goodness is in any creature, are united. 26. What such a figure represents is the benign, protecting power of destiny. The fantasy is a reassurance, a promise that the peace of paradise, which was known first within the mother womb, is not to be lost, that it supports the present and stands in the future as well as in the past, is Omega as well as Alpha. That though omnipotence may seem to be endangered by the threshold passages and life awakenings, protective power is always and ever present within the sanctuary of the heart and even immanent within, or just behind, the unfamiliar features of the world. One has only to know and trust, and the ageless guardians will appear. Having responded to his own call, and continuing to follow courageously as the consequences unfold, the hero finds all the forces of the unconscious at his side. Mother Nature herself supports the mighty task, and in so far as the hero's act coincides with that for which his society itself is ready, he seems to ride on the great rhythm of the historical process. I feel myself, said Napoleon at the opening of his Russian campaign, driven towards an end that I do not know. As soon as I shall have reached it, as soon as I shall become unnecessary, an atom will suffice to shatter me. Till then, not all the forces of mankind can do anything against me. 27. Figure 15. Virgil leading Dante, ink on vellum, Italy, 14th century A.D. Not infrequently, the supernatural helper is masculine in form. In fairy lore it may be some little fellow of the wood, some wizard, hermit, shepherd, or smith, who appears, to supply the amulets and advice that the hero will require. The higher mythologies develop a role in the great figure of the guide, the teacher, the ferryman, the conductor of souls to the afterworld. In classical myth this is Hermes Mercury, in Egyptian, usually Thoth, the ibis god, the baboon god, in Christian, the Holy Ghost. 28. Goethe presents the masculine guide in Faust as Mephistopheles, and not infrequently the dangerous aspect of the mercurial figure is stressed, for he is the lurer of the innocent soul into realms of trial. In Dante's vision the part is played by Virgil, who yields to Beatrice at the threshold of paradise. Protective and dangerous, motherly and fatherly at the same time, this supernatural principle of guardianship and direction unites in itself all the ambiguities of the unconscious, thus signifying the support of our conscious personality by that other, larger system, but also the inscrutability of the guide that we are following, to the peril of all our rational ends. The following dream supplies a vivid example of the fusion of opposites in the unconscious. I dreamed that I had gone into a street of brothels and to one of the girls. As I entered, she changed into a man, who was lying, half-clothed, on a sofa. He said, "It doesn't disturb you, that I am now a man." The man looked old, and he had white sideburns. He reminded me of a certain chief forester who was a good friend of my father. 29. All dreams, Dr. Steckel observes, have a bisexual tendency. Where the bisexuality cannot be perceived, it is hidden in the latent dream content. 30. The hero to whom such a helper appears is typically one who has responded to the call. The call, in fact, was the first announcement of the approach of this initiatory priest. But even to those who apparently have hardened their hearts the supernatural guardian may appear, for, as we have seen, well able is Allah to save. And so it happened, as it were by chance, that in the ancient and deserted tower where Kamar al-Zaman, the Persian prince, lay sleeping, there was an old Roman well, and this was inhabited by a jinniyah of the seed of Iblis the accursed, by name Maimuna, daughter of al-Damiriyat, a renowned king of the jinn. Compare Maimuna the jinn to the frog of the fairy tale. In pre-Muhammadan Arabia the jinn, singular, jinni, jinniyah, were haunting demons of the deserts and wilderness. Hairy and misformed, or else shaped as animals, ostriches, or serpents, they were very dangerous to unprotected persons. The Prophet Muhammad admitted the existence of these heathen spirits, 31, and incorporated them in the Muhammadan system, which recognizes three created intelligences under Allah: angels formed of light, jinn of subtle fire, and man of the dust of the earth. The Muhammadan jinn have the power of putting on any form they please, but not grosser than the essence of fire and smoke, and they can thus make themselves visible to mortals. There are three orders of jinn: flyers, walkers, and divers. Many are supposed to have accepted the true faith, and these are regarded as good, the rest are bad. The latter dwell and work in close association with the fallen angels, whose chief is Iblis, the despairer. And as Kamar al-Zaman continued sleeping till the first third of the night, Maimuna came up out of the Roman well and made for the firmament, thinking to listen by stealth to the converse of the angels. But when she reached the mouth of the well, and saw a light shining in the tower room, contrary to custom, she marveled, drew nigh, entered within the door, and beheld the couch spread, whereon was a human form with a wax candle burning at his head and the lantern at his feet. She folded her wings and stood by the bed, and, drawing back the coverlid, discovered Kamar al-Zaman's face. And she was motionless for a full hour in admiration and wonderment. "Blessed be Allah," she exclaimed when she recovered, "the best of creators," for she was of the true believing jinn. Then she promised herself that she would do no hurt to Kamar al-Zaman, and became concerned lest, resting in this desert place, he should be slain by one of her relatives, the Marids. Bending over him, she kissed him between the eyes, and presently drew back the sheet over his face, and after a while she spread her wings and, soaring into the air, flew upwards till she drew near to the lowest of the heavens. Now as chance or destiny would have it, the soaring Ifrit Maimuna suddenly heard in her neighborhood the noisy flapping of wings. Directing herself by the sound, she found it coming from an Ifrit called Danash. So she swooped down on him like a sparrow hawk, and when he was aware of her and knew her to be Maimuna, the daughter of the king of the Jinn, he was sore afraid, and his side muscles quivered, and he implored her to forbear. But she challenged him to declare whence he should be coming at this hour of the night. He replied that he was returning from the islands of the inland sea in the parts of China, the realms of King Gyre, lord of the islands and the seas and the 7 palaces. There, said he, I saw a daughter of his, than whom Allah hath made none fairer in her time. And he launched into great praise of the Princess Budr. She hath a nose, said he, like the edge of a burnished blade, and cheeks like purple wine or anemone's blood red. Her lips as coral and cornelian shine, and the water of her mouth is sweeter than old wine. Its taste would quench hell's fiery pain. Her tongue is moved by wit of high degree and ready repartee. Her breast is seduction to all that see. Glory be to him who fashioned it and finished it, and joined thereto her 2 upper arms smooth and rounded, even as saith of her the poet Al-Walahan. She has wrists which, did her bangles not contain, would run from out her sleeves in silvern rain. The celebration of her beauty continued, and when Maimuna had heard it all she remained silent in astonishment. Danash resumed, and described the mighty king, her father, his treasures, and the 7 palaces, as well as the history of the daughter's refusal to wed. And I, said he, O my lady, go to her every night and take my fill of feeding my sight on her face, and I kiss her between the eyes. Yet, of my love to her, I do her no hurt. He desired Maimuna to fly back with him to China and look on the beauty, loveliness, stature, and perfection of proportion of the princess. And after, if thou wilt, said he, chastise me or enslave me, for it is thine to bid and to forbid. Maimuna was indignant that anyone should presume to celebrate any creature in the world, after the glimpse she had just had of Kamar al-Zaman. Fa, fa, she cried. She laughed at Danash and spat in his face. Verily, this night I have seen a young man, said she, whom if thou saw though but in a dream, thou wouldst be palsied with admiration and spittle would flow from thy mouth. And she described his case. Danash expressed his disbelief that anyone could be more handsome than the Princess Budr, and Maimuna commanded him to come down with her and look. I hear and I obey, said Danash. And so they descended and alighted in the salon. Maimuna stationed Danash beside the bed and, putting out her hand, drew back the silken coverlet from Kamar al-Zaman's face, when it glittered and glistened and shimmered and shone like the rising sun. She gazed at him for a moment, then turning sharply round upon Danash said, Look, O accursed, and be not the basest of madmen. I am a maid, yet my heart he hath waylaid. By Allah, O my lady, thou art excusable, declared Danash, but there is yet another thing to be considered, and that is, that the estate female differeth from the male. By Allah's might, this thy beloved is the likest of all created things to my mistress in beauty and loveliness and grace and perfection, and it is as though they were both cast alike in the mold of seemlihead. The light became darkness in Maimuna's sight when she heard those words, and she dealt Danash with her wings so fierce a buffet on the head as well nigh made an end of him. I conjure thee, she commanded, by the light of my love's glorious countenance, go at once, O accursed, and bring hither thy mistress whom thou lovest so fondly and foolishly, and return in haste that we may lay the twain together and look at them both as they lie asleep side by side, so shall it appear to us which be the goodlier and more beautiful of the two. And so, incidentally to something going on in a zone of which he was entirely unconscious, the destiny of the life-reluctant Kamar al-Zaman began to fulfill itself, without the cooperation of his conscious will. 32. Figure 16. Odysseus and the Sirens. Detail. Polychrome figured white Lesithus, Greece, 5th century B.C. 4. The crossing of the first threshold. With the personifications of his destiny to guide and aid him, the hero goes forward in his adventure until he comes to the threshold guardian, at the entrance to the zone of magnified power. Such custodians bound the world in the 4 directions, also up and down, standing for the limits of the hero's present sphere, or life horizon. Beyond them is darkness, the unknown, and danger, just as beyond the parental watch is danger to the infant and beyond the protection of his society danger to the member of the tribe. The usual person is more than content, he is even proud, to remain within the indicated bounds, and popular belief gives him every reason to fear so much as the first step into the unexplored. Thus the sailors of the bold vessels of Columbus, breaking the horizon of the medieval mind, sailing, as they thought, into the boundless ocean of immortal being that surrounds the cosmos, like an endless mythological serpent biting its tail. 33. Had to be cozened and urged on like children, because of their fear of the fabled leviathans, mermaids, dragon kings, and other monsters of the deep. The folk mythologies populate with deceitful and dangerous presences every desert place outside the normal traffic of the village. For example, the Hottentots describe an ogre that has been occasionally encountered among the scrubs and dunes. Its eyes are set on its instep, so that to discover what is going on it has to get down on hands and knees, and hold up one foot. The eye then looks behind, otherwise it is gazing continually at the sky. This monster is a hunter of men, whom it tears to shreds with cruel teeth as long as fingers. The creature is said to hunt in packs. 34. Another Hottentot apparition, the High Uri, progresses by leaping over clumps of scrub instead of going around them. 35. A dangerous one-legged, one-armed, one-sided figure, the half-man, invisible if viewed from the offside, is encountered in many parts of the earth. In Central Africa it is declared that such a half-man says to the person who has encountered him, "Since you have met with me, let us fight together." If thrown, he will plead, "Do not kill me. I will show you lots of medicines," and then the lucky person becomes a proficient doctor. But if the half-man, called Shirui, a mysterious thing, wins, his victim dies. 36. The regions of the unknown, desert, jungle, deep sea, alien land, etc., are free fields for the projection of unconscious content. Incestuous libido and patricidal destrudo are thence reflected back against the individual and his society in forms suggesting threats of violence and fancied dangerous delight, not only as ogres but also as sirens of mysteriously seductive, nostalgic beauty. The Russian peasants know, for example, of the wild women of the woods who have their abode in mountain caverns where they maintain households like human beings. They are handsome females, with fine square heads, abundant tresses, and hairy bodies. They fling their breasts over their shoulders when they run and when they nurse their children. They go in groups. With unguents prepared from forest roots they can anoint and render themselves invisible. They like to dance or tickle people to death who wander alone into the forest, and anyone who accidentally chances upon their invisible dancing parties dies. On the other hand, for people who set out food for them, they reap the grain, spin, care for the children, and tidy up the house, and if a girl will comb out hemp for them to spin, they will give her leaves that turn to gold. They enjoy human lovers, have frequently married country youths, and are known to make excellent wives. But like all supernatural brides, the minute the husband offends in the least their whimsical notions of marital propriety, they disappear without a trace. 37. One more example, to illustrate the libidinous association of the dangerous impish ogre with the principle of seduction, is Didushka Vodyanoi, the Russian, water grandfather. He is an adroit shapeshifter and is said to drown people who swim at midnight or at noon. Drowned or disinherited girls he marries. He has a special talent for coaxing unhappy women into his toils. He likes to dance on moonlit nights. Whenever a wife of his is about to have a baby, he comes into the villages to seek a midwife. But he can be detected by the water that oozes from the border of his garments. He is bald, tun-bellied, puffy-cheeked, with green clothing and a tall cap of reeds. But he can also appear as an attractive young man, or as some personage well known in the community. This water master is not strong ashore, but in his own element he is supreme. He inhabits the deeps of rivers, streams, and ponds, preferring to be close beside a mill. During the day he remains concealed, like an old trout or salmon, but at night he surfaces, splashing and flopping like a fish, to drive his subaqueous cattle, sheep, and horses ashore to graze, or else to perch up on the mill wheel and quietly comb his long green hair and beard. In the springtime, when he rouses from his long hibernation, he smashes the ice along the rivers, piling up great blocks. Mill wheels he is amused to destroy. But in a favorable temper he drives his fish herds into the fisherman's net or gives warning of coming floods. The midwife who accompanies him he pays richly with silver and gold. His beautiful daughters, tall, pale, and with an air of sadness, transparently costumed in green, torture and torment the drowned. They like to rock on trees, beautifully singing. 38. The Arcadian god Pan is the best-known classical example of this dangerous presence dwelling just beyond the protected zone of the village boundary. Sylvanus and Faunus were his Latin counterparts. He was the inventor of the shepherd's pipe, which he played for the dances of the nymphs, and the satyrs were his male companions. The emotion that he instilled in human beings who by accident adventured into his domain was panic, fear, a sudden, groundless fright. Any trifling cause then, the break of a twig, the flutter of a leaf, would flood the mind with imagined danger, and in the frantic effort to escape from his own aroused unconscious the victim expired in a flight of dread. Yet Pan was benign to those who paid him worship, yielding the boons of the divine hygiene of nature, bounty to the farmers, herders, and fisherfolk who dedicated their first fruits to him, and health to all who properly approached his shrines of healing. Also wisdom, the wisdom of Omphalos, the world navel, was his to bestow, for the crossing of the threshold is the first step into the sacred zone of the universal source. At Lycaon was an oracle, presided over by the nymph Erato, whom Pan inspired, as Apollo the prophetess at Delphi. And Plutarch numbers the ecstasies of the orgiastic rites of Pan along with the ecstasy of Cybele, the Bacchic frenzy of Dionysus, the poetic frenzy inspired by the Muses, the warrior frenzy of the god Ares, equals Mars, and, fiercest of all, the frenzy of love, as illustrations of that divine enthusiasm that overturns the reason and releases the forces of the destructive creative dark. I dreamed, stated a middle-aged, married gentleman, that I wanted to get into a wonderful garden. But before it there was a watchman who would not permit me to enter. I saw that my friend, Fräulein Elsa, was within, She wanted to reach me her hand, over the gate. But the watchman prevented that, took me by the arm, and conducted me home. Do be sensible, after all, he said. You know that you mustn't do that. 39. This is a dream that brings out the sense of the first, or protective, aspect of the threshold guardian. One had better not challenge the watcher of the established bounds. And yet, it is only by advancing beyond those bounds, provoking the other, destructive aspect of the same power, that the individual passes, either alive or in death, into a new zone of experience. In the language of the pygmies of the Andaman Islands, the word Okojumu, dreamer, one who speaks from dreams, designates those highly respected and feared individuals who are distinguished from their fellows by the possession of supernatural talents, which can be acquired only by meeting with the spirits, directly in the jungle, through extraordinary dream, or by death and return. 40. The adventure is always and everywhere a passage beyond the veil of the known into the unknown. The powers that watch at the boundary are dangerous. To deal with them is risky. Yet for anyone with competence and courage the danger fades. In the Banks Islands of the New Hebrides, if a young man coming back from his fishing on a rock, towards sunset, chances to see a girl with her head bedecked with flowers beckoning to him from the slope of the cliff up which his path is leading him, he recognizes the countenance of some girl of his own or a neighboring village. He stands and hesitates and thinks she must be a May. He looks more closely, and observes that her elbows and knees bend the wrong way. This reveals her true character, and he flies. If a young man can strike the temptress with a dracaena leaf, she turns into her own shape and glides away as snake. But these very snakes, the May, so greatly feared, are believed to become the familiars of those who have intercourse with them. 41. Such demons, at once dangers and bestowers of magic power, every hero must encounter who steps an inch outside the walls of his tradition. Two vivid Oriental stories will serve to illuminate the ambiguities of this perplexing past and show how, though the terrors will recede before a genuine psychological readiness, the overbold adventurer beyond his depth may be shamelessly undone. The first is of a caravan leader from Benares, who made bold to conduct his richly loaded expedition of 500 carts into a waterless demon wilderness. Forewarned of dangers, he had taken the precaution to set huge chatties filled with water in the carts, so that, rationally considered, his prospect of making the passage of not more than 60 desert leagues was of the best. But when he had reached the middle of the crossing, the ogre who inhabited that wilderness thought, I will make these men throw away the water they took. So he created a cart to delight the heart, drawn by pure white young oxen, the wheels smeared with mud, and came down the road from the opposite direction. Both before him and behind marched the demons who formed his retinue, heads wet, garments wet, decked with garlands of water lilies both blue and white, carrying in their hands clusters of lotus flowers both red and white, chewing the fibrous stalks of water lilies, streaming with drops of water and mud. And when the caravan and the demon company drew aside to let each other pass, the ogre greeted the leader in a friendly manner. Where are you going? He politely asked. To which the caravan leader replied, We, sir, are coming from Benares. But you are approaching decked with water lilies both blue and white, with lotus flowers both red and white in your hands, chewing the fibrous stalks of water lilies, smeared with mud, with drops of water streaming from you. Is it raining along the road by which you came? Are the lakes completely covered with water lilies both blue and white, and lotus flowers both red and white? The ogre. Do you see that dark green streak of woods? Beyond that point the entire forest is one mass of water. It rains all the time. The hollows are full of water. Everywhere are lakes completely covered with lotus flowers both red and white. And then, as the carts passed one after another, he inquired, What goods do you have in this cart, and in that? The last moves very heavily. What goods do you have in that? We have water in that, the leader answered. You have acted wisely, of course, in bringing water thus far, but beyond this point you have no occasion to burden yourself. Break the chatties to pieces, throw away the water, travel at ease. The ogre went his way, and when out of sight, returned again to his own city of ogres. Now that caravan leader, out of his own foolishness, took the advice of the ogre, broke the chatties, and caused the carts to move forward. Ahead there was not the slightest particle of water. For lack of water to drink the men grew weary. They traveled until sundown, and then unharnessed the carts, drew them up in a contracted circle, and tied the oxen to the wheels. There was neither water for the oxen nor gruel and boiled rice for the men. The weakened men lay down here and there and went to sleep. At midnight the ogres approached from the city of ogres, slew the oxen and men, every one, devoured their flesh, leaving only the bare bones, and, having so done, departed. The bones of their hands and all their other bones lay scattered about in the four directions and the four intermediate directions. 500 carts stood as full as ever. 42. The second story is of a different style. It is told of a young prince who had just completed his military studies under a world-renowned teacher. Having received, as a symbol of his distinction, the title Prince 5 weapons, he accepted the 5 weapons that his teacher gave him, bowed, and, armed with the new weapons, struck out onto the road leading to the city of his father, the king. On the way he came to a certain forest. People at the mouth of the forest warned him. Sir Prince, do not enter this forest, they said. An ogre lives here, named Sticky Hair. He kills every man he sees. Figure 17. Ball with thunderbolt spear, limestone steel, Assyria, 15th-13th century B.C. But the prince was confident and fearless as a maned lion. He entered the forest just the same. When he reached the heart of it, the ogre showed himself. The ogre had increased his stature to the height of a palm tree. He had created for himself a head as big as a summer house with bell-shaped pinnacle, eyes as big as alms bowls, 2 tusks as big as giant bulbs or buds. He had the beak of a hawk. His belly was covered with blotches. His hands and feet were dark green. "Where are you going?" he demanded. "Halt! You are my prey." Prince Five Weapons answered without fear, but with great confidence in the arts and crafts that he had learned. "Ogre," said he, "I knew what I was about when I entered this forest. You would do well to be careful about attacking me, for with an arrow steeped in poison will I pierce your flesh and fell you on the spot." Having thus threatened the ogre, the young prince fitted to his bow an arrow steeped in deadly poison and let fly. It stuck right in the ogre's hair. Then he let fly, one after another, 50 arrows. All stuck right to the ogre's hair. The ogre shook off every one of those arrows, letting them fall right at his feet, and approached the young prince. Prince Five Weapons threatened the ogre a second time, and drawing his sword, delivered a masterly blow. The sword, 33 inches long, stuck right to the ogre's hair. Then the prince smote him with a spear. That also stuck right to his hair. Perceiving that the spear had stuck, he smote him with a club. That also stuck right to his hair. When he saw that the club had stuck, he said, "Master Ogre, you have never heard of me before. I am Prince Five Weapons. When I entered this forest infested by you, I took no account of bows and such like weapons. When I entered this forest, I took account only of myself. Now I am going to beat you and pound you into powder and dust." Having thus made known his determination, with a yell he struck the ogre with his right hand. His hand stuck right to the ogre's hair. He struck him with his left hand. That also stuck. He struck him with his right foot. That also stuck. He struck him with his left foot. That also stuck. Thought he, "I will beat you with my head and pound you into powder and dust." He struck him with his head. That also stuck right to the ogre's hair. Prince Five Weapons, snared 5 times, stuck fast in 5 places, dangled from the ogre's body. But for all that, he was unafraid, undaunted. As for the ogre, he thought, "This is some lion of a man, some man of noble birth, no mere man. For although he has been caught by an ogre like me, he appears neither to tremble nor to quake. In all the time I have harried this road, I have never seen a single man to match him. Why, pray, is he not afraid?" Not daring to eat him, he asked, "Youth, why are you not afraid? Why are you not terrified with the fear of death?" "Ogre, why should I be afraid? For in one life one death is absolutely certain. What's more, I have in my belly a thunderbolt for a weapon. If you eat me, you will not be able to digest that weapon. It will tear your insides into tatters and fragments and will kill you. In that case we'll both perish. That's why I'm not afraid." Prince Five Weapons, the reader must know, was referring to the weapon of knowledge that was within him. Indeed, this young hero was none other than the future Buddha in an earlier incarnation. The thunderbolt, Vajra, is one of the major symbols in Buddhist iconography, signifying the spiritual power of Buddhahood, indestructible enlightenment, which shatters the illusory realities of the world. The Absolute or Adi Buddha is represented in the images of Tibet as Vajradhara, Tibetan, Dorje Chong, holder of the adamantine bolt. In the figures of the gods that have come down from ancient Mesopotamia, Sumer and Akkad, Babylonia and Assyria, the thunderbolt, in the same form as the Vajra, is a conspicuous element. See figure 17 and figure 62. From these it was inherited by Zeus. We know also that among primitive peoples warriors may speak of their weapons as thunderbolts. Sicut in Silo et in Terra. The initiated warrior is an agent of the divine will. His training is not only in manual but also in spiritual skills. Magic, the supernatural power of the thunderbolt, as well as physical force and chemical poison, gives the lethal energy to his blows. A consummate master would require no physical weapon at all. The power of his magic word would suffice. The parable of Prince Five Weapons illustrates this theme. But it also teaches that the one who relies or prides himself upon his merely empirical, physical character is already undone. We have here the picture of a hero, writes Dr. Kumaraswamy, who can be involved in the coils of an aesthetic experience, the 5 points, being the 5 senses, but is able, by an intrinsic moral superiority, to liberate himself, and even to release others. 43. What this youth says is true, thought the ogre, terrified with the fear of death. From the body of this lion of a man, my stomach would not be able to digest a fragment of flesh even so small as a kidney bean. I'll let him go. And he let Prince Five Weapons go. The future Buddha preached the doctrine to him, subdued him, made him self-denying, and then transformed him into a spirit entitled to receive offerings in the forest. Having admonished the ogre to be heedful, the youth departed from the forest, and at the mouth of the forest told his story to human beings, then went his way. 44. As a symbol of the world to which the 5 senses glue us, and which cannot be pressed aside by the actions of the physical organs, Sticky Hair was subdued only when the future Buddha, no longer protected by the 5 weapons of his momentary name and physical character, resorted to the unnamed and visible 6th. the divine thunderbolt of the knowledge of the transcendent principle, which is beyond the phenomenal realm of names and forms. Therewith the situation changed. He was no longer caught, but released, for that which he now remembered himself to be as ever free. The force of the monster of phenomenality was dispelled, and he was rendered self-denying. Self-denying, he became divine, a spirit entitled to receive offerings, as is the world itself when known, not as final, but as a mere name and form of that which transcends, yet is immanent within, all names and forms. The wall of paradise, which conceals God from human sight, is described by Nicholas of Cusa as constituted of the coincidence of opposites, its gate being guarded by the highest spirit of reason, who bars the way until he has been overcome. 45. The pairs of opposites, being and not being, life and death, beauty and ugliness, good and evil, and all the other polarities that bind the faculties to hope and fear, and link the organs of action to deeds of defense and acquisition, are the clashing rocks, simple gates, that crush the traveler, but between which the heroes always pass. This is a motif known throughout the world. The Greeks associated it with two rocky islands of the Euxine Sea, which clashed together, driven by winds. But Jason, in the Argo, sailed between, and since that time they have stood apart. 46. The twin heroes of the Navajo legend were warned of the same obstacle by Spider-Woman. Protected, however, by the pollen symbol of the path, and eagle feathers plucked from a living sunbird, they pass between. See figure 14, 47. As the rising smoke of an offering through the sun door, so goes the hero, released from ego, through the walls of the world, leaving ego stuck to sticky hair and passing on. 5. The belly of the whale. The idea that the passage of the magical threshold is a transit into a sphere of rebirth is symbolized in the worldwide womb image of the belly of the whale. The hero, instead of conquering or conciliating the power of the threshold, is swallowed into the unknown, and would appear to have died. Mish Nama, king of fishes. In his wrath he darted upward. Flashing leapt into the sunshine. Opened his great jaws and swallowed both canoe and Hiawatha. 48. The Eskimo of Bering Strait tell of the trickster hero Raven, how, one day, as he sat drying his clothes on a beach, he observed a whale cow swimming gravely close to shore. He called, "Next time you come up for air, dear, open your mouth and shut your eyes." Then he slipped quickly into his raven clothes, pulled on his raven mask, gathered his fire sticks under his arm, and flew out over the water. The whale came up. She did as she had been told. Raven darted through the open jaws and straight into her gullet. The shocked whale cow snapped and sounded. Raven stood inside and looked around. 49. The Zulus have a story of two children and their mother swallowed by an elephant. When the woman reached the animal's stomach, she saw large forests and great rivers, and many high lands. On one side there were many rocks, and there were many people who had built their village there, and many dogs and many cattle, all there inside the elephant. 50. Figure 18. Saturn swallowing his children. Detail. Oil on plaster, mounted on canvas, Spain, A.D. 1819. The Irish hero Finn McCool was swallowed by a monster of indefinite form, of the type known to the Celtic world as a Peist. The little German girl Red Riding Hood was swallowed by a wolf. The Polynesian favorite Maui was swallowed by his great-great-grandmother, Hain Nui Te Po. And the whole Greek pantheon, with the sole exception of Zeus, was swallowed by its father, Kronos. The Greek hero Heracles, pausing at Troy on his way homeward with the belt of the queen of the Amazons, found that the city was being harassed by a monster sent against it by the sea god Poseidon. The beast would come ashore and devour people as they moved about on the plain. Beautiful Hesione, the daughter of the king, had just been bound by her father to the sea rocks as a propitiatory sacrifice, and the great visiting hero agreed to rescue her for a price. The monster, in due time, broke to the surface of the water and opened its enormous maw. Heracles took a dive into the throat, cut his way out through the belly, and left the monster dead. Figure 19. Threshold Guardians, bearing thunderbolts, painted wood, Japan, A.D. 1203. This popular motif gives emphasis to the lesson that passage of the threshold is a form of self-annihilation. Its resemblance to the adventure of the Symplegades is obvious. But here, instead of passing outward, beyond the confines of the visible world, the hero goes inward, to be born again. The disappearance corresponds to the passing of a worshipper into the temple, where he is to be quickened by the recollection of who and what he is, namely dust and ashes unless immortal. The temple interior, the belly of the whale, and the heavenly land beyond, above, and below the confines of the world, are one and the same. That is why the approaches of and the entrances to temples are flanked and defended by colossal gargoyles, dragons, lions, devil slayers with drawn swords, resentful dwarves, winged bulls. These are the threshold guardians to ward away all incapable of encountering the higher silence within. They are preliminary embodiments of the dangerous aspect of the presence, corresponding to the mythological ogres that bound the conventional world, or to the 2 rows of teeth of the whale. They illustrate the fact that the devotee at the moment of the entry into the temple undergoes a metamorphosis. His secular character remains without, he sheds it as a snake it slew. Once inside he may be said to have died to time and returned to the world womb, the world navel, the earthly paradise. The mere fact that anyone can physically walk past the temple guardians does not invalidate their significance, for if the intruder is incapable of encompassing the sanctuary, he has effectually remained without. Anyone unable to understand a god sees it as a devil and is thus defended from the approach. Allegorically, then, the passage into a temple and the hero dive through the jaws of the whale are identical adventures, both denoting, in the picture language, the life-centering, life-renewing act. No creature, writes Ananda Kumaraswamy, can attain a higher grade of nature without ceasing to exist. 51. Indeed, the physical body of the hero may be actually slain, dismembered, and scattered over the land or sea, as in the Egyptian myth of the savior Osiris. He was thrown into a sarcophagus and committed to the Nile by his brother Set, and when he returned from the dead his brother slew him again, tore the body into 14 pieces, and scattered these over the land. The twin heroes of the Navajo had to pass not only the clashing rocks, but also the reeds that cut the traveler to pieces, the boiling sands that overwhelm him. The hero whose attachment to ego is already annihilated passes back and forth across the horizons of the world, in and out of the dragon, as readily as a king through all the rooms of his house. And therein lies his power to save, for his passing and returning demonstrate that through all the contraries of phenomenality the uncreated imperishable remains, and there is nothing to fear. And so it is that, throughout the world, men whose function it has been to make visible on earth the life-fructifying mystery of the slaying of the dragon have enacted upon their own bodies the great symbolic act, scattering their flesh, like the body of Osiris, for the renovation of the world. In Phrygia, for example, in honor of the crucified and resurrected savior Attis, a pine tree was cut on the 22nd of March, and brought into the sanctuary of the mother goddess, Cybele. There it was swathed like a corpse with woolen bands and decked with wreaths of violets. The effigy of a young man was tied to the middle of the stem. Next day took place a ceremonial lament and blowing of trumpets. The 24th of March was known as the Day of Blood. The high priest drew blood from his arms, which he presented as an offering. The lesser clergy whirled in a dervish dance, to the sound of drums, horns, flutes, and cymbals, until, wrapped in ecstasy, they gashed their bodies with knives to bespatter the altar and tree with their blood. And the novices, in imitation of the god whose death and resurrection they were celebrating, castrated themselves and swooned. 52. Attis's is the sacrifice that King Minos refused when he withheld the bull from Poseidon. As Fraser has shown, ritual regicide was a general tradition in the ancient world. In southern India, he writes, the king's reign and life terminated with the revolution of the planet Jupiter round the sun. In Greece, on the other hand, the king's fate seems to have hung in the balance at the end of every 8 years. Without being unduly rash, we may surmise that the tribute of 7 youths and 7 maidens whom the Athenians were bound to send to Minos every 8 years had some connection with the renewal of the king's power for another octennial cycle. 53. The bull sacrifice required of King Minos implied that he would sacrifice himself, according to the pattern of the inherited tradition, at the close of his 8-year term. But he seems to have offered, instead, the substitute of the Athenian youths and maidens. That perhaps is how the divine Minos became the monster Minotaur, the self-annihilate king, the tyrant Holdfast, and the hieratic state, wherein every man enacts his role, the merchant empire, wherein each is out for himself. Such practices of substitution seem to have become general throughout the antique world toward the close of the great period of the early hieratic states, during the 3rd and 2nd millennia B.C. And in the same spirit, the king of the South Indian province of Keelakere, at the completion of the 12th year of his reign, on a day of solemn festival, had a wooden scaffolding constructed, and spread over with hangings of silk. When he had ritually bathed in a tank, with great ceremonies and to the sound of music, he then came to the temple, where he did worship before the divinity. Thereafter, he mounted the scaffolding and, before the people, took some very sharp knives and began to cut off his own nose, and then his ears, and his lips, and all his members, and as much of his flesh as he was able. He threw it away and round about, until so much of his blood was spilled that he began to faint, whereupon he summarily cut his throat. 54. Figure 20. The return of Jason, red figure Calyx, Etruscan, Italy, circa 470 B.C. Footnotes. * See Freud. Castration complex. * the serpent, in mythology a symbol of the terrestrial waters, corresponds precisely to Daphne's father, the river Peneus. * pollen is a symbol of spiritual energy among the American Indians of the Southwest. It is used profusely in all ceremonials, both to drive evil away and to mark out the symbolical path of life. * the well is symbolical of the unconscious. Compare that of the fairy story of the Frog King, pp. 41-42. * and Ifrit, Ifrita, is a powerful jinni, Jinnaya. The Marids are a particularly powerful and dangerous class of jinn. In Alexandrian times Pan was identified with the Ithyphallic Egyptian divinity Min, who was, among other things, the guardian of desert roads. Compare Dionysus, the great Thracian counterpart of Pan. The watchman symbolizes, according to Wilhelm Steckel, consciousness, or, if one prefers, the aggregate of all the morality and restrictions present in consciousness. Freud, continues Dr. Steckel, would describe the watchman as the superego. But he is really only an interego. Consciousness prevents the breaking through of dangerous wishes and immoral actions. This is the sense in which watchmen, police officials and officers in dreams are in general to be interpreted. Wilhelm Steckel, Fortschritt und Technik der Traumdeutung, Wien Leipzig Bern. Verlag für Medizin, Weidmann und C. 1935, pp. 37-38. Asterisk, an amphibious sea snake marked with bands of dark and light color, always more or less dreaded whenever it is seen. Asterisk, it has been pointed out that this adventure of Prince Five Weapons is the earliest known example of the celebrated and well-nigh universal tar baby story of popular folklore. C. Aurelio M. Espinosa. Notes on the Origin and History of the Tar Baby Story, Journal of American Folklore, 43, 1930, 129-209. A new classification of the fundamental elements of the Tar Baby story on the basis of 267 versions, Journal of American Folklore, 56, 1943, 31-37, and Ananda K. Kumaraswamy, A Note on the Stick-Fast Motif, Journal of American Folklore, 57, 1944, 128-131. Asterisk, the sarcophagus or casket is an alternative for the belly of the whale. Compare Moses in the Bulrushes. Endnotes. 1. Grimm's Fairy Tales, No. 1, The Frog King. 2. The Psychopathology of Everyday Life, Standard Edition, v. Arridge, 1901. 3. Evelyn Underhill, Mysticism, A Study in the Nature and Development of Man's Spiritual Consciousness, New York, E. P. Dutton and Company, 1911, Part 2, The Mystic Way, Chapter 2, The Awakening of the Self. 4. Sigmund Freud, Introductory Lectures on Psychoanalysis, translated by James Strachey, Standard Edition, 16. London, Hogarth Press, 1963, pp. 396-97, Arridge, 1916-17. 5. Mallory, Le Morte d'Arthur, I, page she. This pursuit of the heart and view of the questing beast marks the beginning of the mysteries associated with the quest of the Holy Grail. 6. George A. Dorsey and Alfred L. Kroeber, Traditions of the Arapaho, Chicago, Field Columbia Museum, Publication 81, Anthropological Series, Volume V. 1903, page 300. Reprinted in Stith Thompson's Tales of the North American Indians, Cambridge, Massachusetts, 1929, page 128. 7. C. G. Jung, Psychology and Alchemy, Collected Works, Volume 12, New York and London, 1953, Pars. 71-73. Arridge, 1935. 8. Wilhelm Steckel, Die Sprache des Traumas, Wiesbaden. Verlag von J. F. Bergman, 1911, page 352. Dr. Steckel points out the relationship of the blood-red glow to the thought of the blood coughed up in consumption. 9. Reprinted by permission of the publishers from Henry Clark Warren, Buddhism in Translations, Harvard Oriental Series 3, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Harvard University Press, 1896, pp. 56-57. 10. Proverbs, 1, 24-27, 32. 11. Spiritual books occasionally quote this Latin saying which has terrified more than one soul. Ernest Dimnet, The Art of Thinking, New York, Simon & Schuster, Inc., 1929, pp. 203-4. 12. Francis Thompson, The Hound of Heaven, Portland, Maine. Thomas B. Mosier, 1908, Opening Lines. 13. Ibid, Conclusion. 14. Ovid, Metamorphoses, ILL. 504-553, translation by Frank Justice Miller, The Loeb Classical Library. 15. See above. 16. Jung, Psychology and Alchemy, Pars. 58-62. 17. Grimm's Fairy Tales, No. 50. 18. The Thousand Nights and One Night, Richard F. Burton translation, Bombay, 1885, Volume I, pp. 164-67. 19. Genesis, 1926. 20. Werner's Iris, Ahasverus, Der Ewige Jude, Stoff und Motivgeschichte der deutschen Literatur 6, Berlin and Leipzig, 1930, page 1. 21. See above. 22. See Otto Rank, Art and Artist, translated by Charles Francis Atkinson, New York. Alfred A. Knopf, Inc., 1943, pp. 40-41. If we compare the neurotic with the productive type, it is evident that the former suffers from an excessive check on his impulsive life. Both are distinguished fundamentally from the average type, who accepts himself as he is, by their tendency to exercise their volition in reshaping themselves. There is, however, this difference, that the neurotic, in this voluntary remaking of his ego, does not get beyond the destructive preliminary work and is therefore unable to detach the whole creative process from his own person and transfer it to an ideological abstraction. The productive artist also begins with that recreation of himself which results in an ideologically constructed ego, but in his case, this ego is then in a position to shift the creative will power from his own person to ideological representations of that person and thus render it objective. It must be admitted that this process is in a measure limited to within the individual himself, and that not only in its constructive, but also in its destructive aspects. This explains why hardly any productive work gets through without morbid crises of a neurotic nature. 23. Abridged from Burton, Op. Cit. Volume 3, pp. 213-28. 24. Bruno Gutmann, Volksbuch der Wadschäger, Leipzig, 1914, page 144. 25. Washington Matthews, Navajo Legends, Memoirs of the American Folklore Society, Volume V, New York, 1897, page 109. For a discussion of the Navajo symbolism of the adventure of the hero, see Jeff King, Maud Oakes, and Joseph Campbell, Where the Two Came to Their Father, A Navajo War Ceremonial, Bollingen Series 1, 2nd ed. Princeton, N.J. Princeton University Press, 1969, pp. 33-49. Joseph Campbell, The Inner Reaches of Outer Space. Myth as Metaphor and as Religion, Novato, C.A. New World Library, 2002, pp. 63-70. And Joseph Campbell, The Spirit Land, Mythos. The Shaping of Our Modern Tradition, Silver Spring, Maryland, Acorn Media, 2007, ed. 26. Dante, Paradiso, 33, 12-21. Translation by Charles Eliot Norton, Op. Cit. Volume 3, page 252, quoted by permission of Houghton Mifflin Company, publishers. 27. See Oswald Spengler, The Decline of the West, translated by Charles Francis Atkinson, New York. Alfred A. Knopf, Inc., 1926-28, Volume I, page 144. Supposing, adds Spengler, that Napoleon himself, as empirical person, had fallen at Marengo, then that which he signified would have been actualized in some other form. The hero, who in this sense and to this degree has become depersonalized, incarnates, during the period of his epical action, the dynamism of the culture process. Between himself as a fact and the other facts there is a harmony of metaphysical rhythm. Ibid. Page 142. This corresponds to Thomas Carlyle's idea of the hero king, as Abelman, on Heroes, Hero Worship and the Heroic in History, Lecture V. 28. During Hellenistic times an amalgamation of Hermes and Thoth was effected in the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes thrice greatest, who was regarded as the patron and teacher of all the arts, and especially of alchemy. The hermetically sealed retort, in which were placed the mystical metals, was regarded as a realm apart, a special region of heightened forces comparable to the mythological realm. And therein the metals underwent strange metamorphoses and transmutations, symbolical of the transfigurations of the soul under the tutelage of the supernatural. Hermes was the master of the ancient mysteries of initiation, and represented the coming down of divine wisdom into the world, which is represented also in the incarnations of divine saviors, see below. C. C. G. Jung, Psychology and Alchemy, Part 3, Religious Ideas in Alchemy. A. Ridge, 1936. For the retort, see par. 338. For Hermes Trismegistus, see par. 173 and Index, S. V. 29. Wilhelm Steckel, Die Sprache des Traumas, pp. 70-71. 30, Ibid. Page 71. 31. Corin, 37-158. 32. Adapted from Burden, Op. Cit. Volume 3, pp. 223-30. 33. Compare the Serpent of the Dream. 34. Leonard S. Schultz, Aus Nommelen und Kalahari, Jena, 1907, page 392. 35. Ibid. pp. 404-448. 36. David Clement Scott, A Cyclopedic Dictionary of the Manganya Language Spoken in British Central Africa, Edinburgh, 1892, page 97. Compare the following dream of a 12-year-old boy. One night I dreamt of a foot. I thought it was lying down on the floor and I, not expecting such a thing, fell over it. It seemed to be the same shape as my own foot. The foot suddenly jumped up and started running after me. I thought I jumped right through the window, ran round the yard out into the street, running along as fast as my legs would carry me. I thought I ran to Woolwich, and then it suddenly caught me and shook me, and then I woke up. I have dreamt about this foot several times. The boy had heard a report that his father, who was a sailor, had recently had an accident at sea in which he had broken his ankle. C. W. Kimmins, Children's Dreams, An Unexplored Land, London. George Allen and Unwin, Limited, 1937, page 107. The foot, writes Dr. Freud, is an age-old sexual symbol which occurs even in mythology. 3 Essays on the Theory of Sexuality, page 155. The name Oedipus, it should be noted, means the swollen-footed. 37. Compare V. J. Mansika in Hastings' Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, Volume IV, page 628, article, Demons and Spirits, Slavic. The cluster of articles by a number of authorities, gathered together in this volume under the general heading, Demons and Spirits, treating severally of the African, Oceanic, Assyro-Babylonian, Buddhist, Celtic, Chinese, Christian, Coptic, Egyptian, Greek, Hebrew, Indian, Jain, Japanese, Jewish, Muslim, Persian, Roman, Slavic, Teutonic, and Tibetan varieties, is an excellent introduction to the subject. 38, Ibid, page 629. Compare the Lorelei. Mansika's discussion of the Slavic forest, field, and water spirits is based on Hannes Makel's comprehensive Knackers Slavonského Bohosloví, Prague, 1891. An English abridgment of which will be found in Mackel's Slavic Mythology, The Mythology of All Races, Volume 3, Boston, 1918. 39. Wilhelm Steckel, Fortschritt und Technik der Traumdeutung, Vienna Leipzig Bern. Verlag für Medizin, Weidmann und C. 1935, page 37. 40. A. R. Radcliffe Brown, The Andaman Islanders, 2nd ed. Cambridge University Press, 1933, pp. 175-77. 41. R. H. Codrington, The Melanesians, Their Anthropology and Folklore, Oxford University Press, 1891, page 189. 42. Jataka, 1-1. Abridged from translation by Eugene Watson Burlingame, Buddhist Parables, Yale University Press, 1922, pp. 32-34. Reprinted by permission of the publishers. 43. Kumaraswamy, Journal of American Folklore 57, 1944, page 129. 44. Jataka, 55-1, 272-75. Adapted, with slight abridgment, from the translation of Eugene Watson Burlingame, Op. Cit. pp. 41-44. Reprinted by permission of Yale University Press, publishers. 45. Nicholas of Kusa, Division Dei, 9, 11. Cited by Ananda K. Kumaraswamy, on the one and only Transmigrant. Supplement to the Journal of the American Oriental Society, April to June, 1944, page 25. 46. Ovid, Metamorphoses, 7, page 62, 15, page 338. 47. See Figure 14, The Rocks That Crush, The Reeds That Cut, and the Associated Story. 48. Longfellow, The Song of Hiawatha, 8. The adventures ascribed by Longfellow to the Iroquois chieftain Hiawatha belong properly to the Algonquin culture hero Manabajo. Hiawatha was an actual historical personage of the 16th century. See below. 49. Leo Frobenius, Das Zeitalter des Sonnengetz, Berlin, 1904, page 85. 50. Henry Callaway, Nursery Tales and Traditions of the Zulus, London, Trubner, 1868, page 331. 51. Ananda K. Kumaraswamy, Akimkana, Self-Nodding, New Indian Antiquary, Volume 3, Bombay, 1940, page 6, note 14, citing and discussing Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologica, I, page 63, 3. 52. Sir James G. Fraser, The Golden Bough, 1-volume edition, pp. 347-49. Copyright 1922 by the Macmillan Company and used with their permission. 53. Ibid, page 280. 54. Duarte Barbosa, A Description of the Coasts of East Africa and Malabar in the Beginning of the 16th Century. London. Hakluyt Society, 1866, page 172. Cited by Fraser, Op. Cit. pp. 274-75. Reprinted by permission of the Macmillan Company, publishers. Figure 21. The Temptation of Saint Anthony, copperplate engraving, Germany, circa A.D. 1470. Chapter I. Initiation 1. The Road of Trials. Once having traversed the threshold, the hero moves in a dream landscape of curiously fluid, ambiguous forms, where he must survive a succession of trials. This is a favorite phase of the myth adventure. It has produced a world literature of miraculous tests and ordeals. The hero is covertly aided by the advice, amulets, and secret agents of the supernatural helper whom he met before his entrance into this region. Or it may be that he here discovers for the first time that there is a benign power everywhere supporting him in his superhuman passage. One of the best known and most charming examples of the difficult tasks motif is that of Psyche's quest for her lost lover, Cupid. 1. Here all the principal roles are reversed. Instead of the lover trying to win his bride, it is the bride trying to win her lover. And instead of a cruel father withholding his daughter from the lover, it is the jealous mother, Venus, hiding her son, Cupid, from his bride. When Psyche pleaded with Venus, the goddess grasped her violently by the hair and dashed her head upon the ground, then took a great quantity of wheat, barley, millet, poppy seed, peas, lentils, and beans, mingled these all together in a heap, and commanded the girl to sort them before night. Psyche was aided by an army of ants. Venus told her, next, to gather the golden wool of certain dangerous wild sheep, sharp of horn and poisonous of bite, that inhabited an inaccessible valley in a dangerous wood. But a green reed instructed her how to gather from the reeds round about the golden locks shed by the sheep in their passage. The goddess now required a bottle of water from a freezing spring high on a towering rock beset by sleepless dragons. An eagle approached and accomplished the marvelous task. Psyche was ordered, finally, to bring from the abyss of the underworld a box full of supernatural beauty. But a high tower told her how to go down to the world below, gave her coins for Charon and sops for Cerberus, and sped her on her way. Psyche's voyage to the underworld is but one of innumerable such adventures undertaken by the heroes of fairy tale and myth. Among the most perilous are those of the shamans of the peoples of the farthest north, the Lapps, Siberians, Eskimo, and certain American Indian tribes, when they go to seek out and recover the lost or abducted souls of the sick. The shaman of the Siberians is clothed for the adventure in a magical costume representing a bird or reindeer, the shadow principle of the shaman himself, the shape of his soul. His drum is his animal, his eagle, reindeer, or horse. He is said to fly or ride on it. The stick that he carries is another of his aids. And he is attended by a host of invisible familiars. An early voyager among the Lapps has left a vivid description of the weird performance of one of these strange emissaries into the kingdoms of the dead. 2. Since the yonder world is a place of everlasting night, the ceremonial of the shaman has to take place after dark. The friends and neighbors gather in the flickering, dimly lighted hut of the patient, and follow attentively the gesticulations of the magician. First he summons the helping spirits. These arrive, invisible to all but himself. 2 women in ceremonial attire, but without belts and wearing linen hoods, a man without hood or belt, and a girl not as yet adult are in attendance. The shaman uncovers his head, loosens his belt and shoestrings, covers his face with his hands and begins to twirl in a variety of circles. Suddenly, with very violent gestures, he shouts, "Fit out the reindeer. Ready to boat." Snatching up an axe, he begins striking himself about the knees with it and swinging it in the direction of the 3 women. He drags burning logs out of the fire with his naked hands. He dashes 3 times around each of the women and finally collapses, like a dead man. During the whole time, no one has been permitted to touch him. While he reposes now in trance, he is to be watched so closely that not even a fly may settle upon him. His spirit has departed, and he is viewing the sacred mountains with their inhabiting gods. The women in attendance whisper to each other, trying to guess in what part of the yonder world he now may be. The women may be unable to locate the shaman's position in the yonder world, in which case his spirit may fail to return to the body. Or the wandering spirit of an enemy shaman may engage him in battle or else lead him astray. It is said that there have been many shamans who failed to return. 3. If they mention the correct mountain, the shaman stirs either a hand or a foot. At length he begins to return. In a low, weak voice he utters the words he has heard in the world below. Then the women begin to sing. The shaman slowly awakes, declaring both the cause of the illness and the manner of sacrifice to be made. Then he announces the length of time it will take for the patient to grow well. On his laborious journey, reports another observer, the shaman has to encounter and master a number of differing obstacles, pudak, which are not always easily overcome. After he has wandered through dark forests and over massive ranges of mountains, where he occasionally comes across the bones of other shamans and their animal mounts who have died along the way, he reaches an opening in the ground. The most difficult stages of the adventure now begin, when the depths of the underworld with their remarkable manifestations open before him. After he has appeased the watchers of the kingdom of the dead and made his way past the numerous perils, he comes at last to the lord of the underworld, or Lik himself. And the latter rushes against him, horribly bellowing, but if the shaman is sufficiently skillful he can soothe the monster back again with promises of luxurious offerings. This moment of the dialogue with Lik is the crisis of the ceremonial. The shaman passes into an ecstasy. 4. In every primitive tribe, writes Dr. Geza-Roheim, we find the medicine man in the center of society, and it is easy to show that the medicine man is either a neurotic or a psychotic, or at least that his art is based on the same mechanisms as a neurosis or a psychosis. Human groups are actuated by their group ideals, and these are always based on the infantile situation. 5. The infancy situation is modified or inverted by the process of maturation, again modified by the necessary adjustment to reality, yet it is there and supplies those unseen libidinal ties without which no human groups could exist. 6. The medicine men, therefore, are simply making both visible and public the systems of symbolic fantasy that are present in the psyche of every adult member of their society. They are the leaders in this infantile game and the lightning conductors of common anxiety. They fight the demons so that others can hunt the prey and in general fight reality. 7. Figure 22. Psyche and Karen, oil on canvas, England, circa A.D. 1873. And so it happens that if anyone, in whatever society, undertakes for himself the perilous journey into the darkness by descending, either intentionally or unintentionally, into the crooked lanes of his own spiritual labyrinth, he soon finds himself in a landscape of symbolical figures, any one of which may swallow him, which is no less marvelous than the wild Siberian world of the Pudak and sacred mountains. In the vocabulary of the mystics, this is the second stage of the way, that of the purification of the self, when the senses are cleansed and humbled, and the energies and interests concentrated upon transcendental things. 8. Or in a vocabulary of more modern turn, this is the process of dissolving, transcending, or transmuting the infantile images of our personal past. In our dreams the ageless perils, gargoyles, trials, secret helpers, and instructive figures are nightly still encountered, and in their forms we may see reflected not only the whole picture of our present case, but also the clue to what we must do to be saved. I stood before a dark cave, wanting to go in, was the dream of a patient at the beginning of his analysis, and I shuddered at the thought that I might not be able to find my way back. 9. I saw one beast after another, Emanuel Swedenborg recorded in his dream book, for the night of October 19 to 20, 1744, and they spread their wings, and were dragons. I was flying over them, but one of them was supporting me. 10. Asterisk in the dramatist Friedrich Hebel recorded, a century later, April 13, 1844, In my dream I was being drawn with great force through the sea. There were terrifying abysses, with here and there rock to which it was possible to hold. 11. Themistocles dreamed that a snake wound itself around his body, then crept up to his neck, and when it touched his face became an eagle that took him in its talons and, carrying him upward, bore him a long distance, and set him down on a golden herald's staff that suddenly appeared, so safely that he was all at once relieved of his great anxiety and fear. 12. The specific psychological difficulties of the dreamer frequently are revealed with touching simplicity and force. I had to climb a mountain. There were all kinds of obstacles in the way. I had now to jump over a ditch, now to get over a hedge, and finally to stand still because I had lost my breath. This was the dream of a stutterer. 13. I stood beside a lake that appeared to be completely still. A storm came up abruptly and high waves arose, so that my whole face was splashed. The dream of a girl afraid of blushing. Erythrophobia, whose face, when she blushed, would become wet with perspiration. 14. I was following a girl who was going ahead of me, along the dark street. I could see her from behind only and admired her beautiful figure. A mighty desire seized me, and I was running after her. Suddenly a beam, as though released from a spring, came across the street and blocked the way. I awoke with my heart pounding. The patient was a homosexual, the transverse beam, a phallic symbol. 15. I got into a car, but did not know how to drive. A man who sat behind me gave me instructions. Finally, things were going quite well and we came to a plaza, where there were a number of women standing. The mother of my fiancée received me with great joy. The man was impotent, but had found an instructor in the psychoanalyst. 16. A stone had broken my windshield. I was now open to the storm and rain. Tears came to my eyes. Could I ever reach my destination in this car? The dreamer was a young woman who had lost her virginity and could not get over it. 17. I saw half of a horse lying on the ground. It had only one wing and was trying to rise, but was unable to do so. The patient was a poet, who had to earn his daily bread by working as a journalist. 18. I was bitten by an infant. The dreamer was suffering from a psychosexual infantilism. 19. I am locked with my brother in a dark room. He has a large knife in his hand. I am afraid of him. You will drive me crazy and bring me to the madhouse, I tell him. He laughs with malicious pleasure, replying, you will always be caught with me. A chain is wrapped around the two of us. I glanced at my legs and noticed for the first time the thick iron chain that bound together my brother and myself. The brother, comments Dr. Steckel, was the patient's illness. 20. I am going over a narrow bridge, dreams a 16-year-old girl. Suddenly it breaks under me and I plunge into the water. An officer dives in after me and brings me, with his strong arms, to the bank. Suddenly it seems to me then that I am a dead body. The officer too looks very pale, like a corpse. 21. The dreamer is absolutely abandoned and alone in a deep hole of a cellar. The walls of his room keep getting narrower and narrower so that he cannot stir. In this image are combined the ideas of mother womb, imprisonment, cell, and grave. 22. I am dreaming that I have to go through endless corridors. Then I remain for a long time in a little room that looks like the bathing pool in the public baths. They compel me to leave the pool, and I have to pass again through a moist, slippery shaft until I come through a little latticed door into the open. I feel like one newly born, and I think, this means a spiritual rebirth for me, through my analysis. 23. There can be no question. The psychological dangers through which earlier generations were guided by the symbols and spiritual exercises of their mythological and religious inheritance, we today, insofar as we are unbelievers, or, if believers, insofar as our inherited beliefs fail to represent the real problems of contemporary life, must face alone, or, at best, with only tentative, impromptu, and not often very effective guidance. This is our problem as modern, enlightened individuals, for whom all gods and devils have been rationalized out of existence. Nevertheless, in the multitude of myths and legends that have been preserved to us, or collected from the ends of the earth, we may yet see delineated something of our still human course. To hear and profit, however, one may have to submit somehow to purgation and surrender. And that is part of our problem, just how to do that. Or do ye think that ye shall enter the garden of bliss without such trials as came to those who passed away before you? 24. The oldest recorded account of the passage through the gates of metamorphosis is the Sumerian myth of the goddess Inanna's descent to the nether world. From the great above, she set her mind toward the great below. The goddess, from the great above, she set her mind toward the great below. Inanna, from the great above, she set her mind toward the great below. My lady abandoned heaven, abandoned earth. To the nether world she descended. Inanna abandoned heaven, abandoned earth. To the nether world she descended. Abandoned lordship, abandoned ladyship. To the nether world she descended. She adorned herself with her queenly robes and jewels. 7 divine decrees she fastened at her belt. She was ready to enter the land of no return, the nether world of death and darkness, governed by her enemy and sister goddess, Ereshkigal. In fear, lest her sister should put her to death, Inanna instructed Ninshubur, her messenger, to go to heaven and set up a hue and cry for her in the assembly hall of the gods if after 3 days she should have failed to return. Inanna descended. She approached the temple made of lapis lazuli, and at the gate was met by the chief gatekeeper, who demanded to know who she was and why she had come. I am the Queen of Heaven, the place where the sun rises, she replied. If thou art the Queen of Heaven, he said, the place where the sun rises, why, pray, hast thou come to the land of no return? On the road whose traveler returns not, how has thy heart led thee? Inanna declared that she had come to attend the funeral rites of her sister's husband, the Lord Gugalana. Whereupon Neti, the gatekeeper, bid her stay until he should report to Ereshkigal. Neti was instructed to open to the Queen of Heaven the 7 gates, but to abide by the custom and remove at each portal a part of her clothing. To the pure Inanna he says, Come, Inanna, enter. Upon her entering the first gate, the Shugara, the crown of the plain, of her head was removed. What, pray, is this? Extraordinarily, O Inanna, have the decrees of the nether world been perfected. O Inanna, do not question the rights of the nether world. Upon her entering the second gate, the rod of lapis lazuli was removed. What, pray, is this? Extraordinarily, O Inanna, have the decrees of the nether world been perfected. O Inanna, do not question the rights of the nether world. Upon her entering the third gate, the small lapis lazuli stones of her neck were removed. What, pray, is this? Extraordinarily, O Inanna, have the decrees of the nether world been perfected. O Inanna, do not question the rights of the nether world. Upon her entering the fourth gate, the sparkling stones of her breast were removed. What, pray, is this? Extraordinarily, O Inanna, have the decrees of the nether world been perfected. O Inanna, do not question the rights of the nether world. Upon her entering the fifth gate, the gold ring of her hand was removed. What, pray, is this? Extraordinarily, O Inanna, have the decrees of the nether world been perfected. O Inanna, do not question the rights of the nether world. Upon her entering the sixth gate, the breastplate of her breast was removed. What, pray, is this? Extraordinarily, O Inanna, have the decrees of the nether world been perfected. O Inanna, do not question the rights of the nether world. Upon her entering the seventh gate, all the garments of ladyship of her body were removed. What, pray, is this? Extraordinarily, O Inanna, have the decrees of the nether world been perfected. O Inanna, do not question the rights of the nether world. Naked, she was brought before the throne. She bowed low. The 7 judges of the netherworld, the Anunnaki, sat before the throne of Ereshkigal, and they fastened their eyes upon Inanna, the eyes of death. At their word, the word which tortures the spirit, the sick woman was turned into a corpse. The corpse was hung from a stake. 25. Inanna and Ereshkigal, the 2 sisters, light and dark respectively, together represent, according to the antique manner of symbolization, the one goddess in 2 aspects, and their confrontation epitomizes the whole sense of the difficult road of trials. The hero, whether god or goddess, man or woman, the figure in a myth or the dreamer of a dream, discovers and assimilates his opposite, his own unsuspected self, either by swallowing it or by being swallowed. One by one the resistances are broken. He must put aside his pride, his virtue, beauty, and life, and bow or submit to the absolutely intolerable. Then he finds that he and his opposite are not of differing species, but one flesh. The ordeal is a deepening of the problem of the first threshold, and the question is still in balance. Can the ego put itself to death? For many-headed is this surrounding hydra. One head cut off, 2 more appear, unless the right caustic is applied to the mutilated stump. The original departure into the land of trials represented only the beginning of the long and really perilous path of initiatory conquests and moments of illumination. Dragons have now to be slain and surprising barriers passed, again, and again. Meanwhile there will be a multitude of preliminary victories, unretainable ecstasies, and momentary glimpses of the wonderful land. 2. The meeting with the goddess. Figure 23. Mother of the gods, carved wood, Egba Yoruba, Nigeria, date uncertain. The ultimate adventure, when all the barriers and ogres have been overcome, is commonly represented as a mystical marriage, Hyros ga micro O's, of the triumphant hero soul with the queen goddess of the world. This is the crisis at the nadir, at the zenith, or at the uttermost edge of the earth, at the central point of the cosmos, in the tabernacle of the temple, or within the darkness of the deepest chamber of the heart. In the west of Ireland they still tell the tale of the Prince of the Lonesome Isle and the Lady of Tubber Tinti. Hoping to heal the Queen of Erin, the heroic youth had undertaken to go for 3 bottles of the water of Tubber Tinti, the flaming fairy well. Following the advice of a supernatural aunt whom he encountered on the way, and riding a wonderful, dirty, lean little shaggy horse that she gave to him, he crossed a river of fire and escaped the touch of a grove of poison trees. The horse with the speed of the wind shot past the end of the castle of Tubber Tinti. The prince sprang from its back through an open window, and came down inside, safe and sound. The whole place, enormous in extent, was filled with sleeping giants and monsters of sea and land, great whales, long slippery eels, bears, and beasts of every form and kind. The prince passed through them and over them till he came to a great stairway. At the head of the stairway he went into a chamber, where he found the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, stretched on a couch asleep. "I'll have nothing to say to you," thought he, and went on to the next, and so he looked into 12 chambers. In each was a woman more beautiful than the one before. But when he reached the 13th chamber and opened the door, the flash of gold took the sight from his eyes. He stood a while till the sight came back and then entered. In the great bright chamber was a golden couch, resting on wheels of gold. The wheels turned continually. The couch went round and round, never stopping night or day. On the couch lay the queen of Tubber-Tinti, and if her 12 maidens were beautiful, they would not be beautiful if seen near her. At the foot of the couch was Tubber-Tinti itself, the well of fire. There was a golden cover upon the well, and it went around continually with the couch of the queen. "Upon my word," said the prince, "I'll rest here a while." And he went up on the couch and never left it for 6 days and nights. 26. The Lady of the House of Sleep is a familiar figure in fairy tale and myth. We have already spoken of her, under the forms of Brynhild and Little Briar Rose. 27. She is the paragon of all paragons of beauty, the reply to all desire, the bliss-bestowing goal of every hero's earthly and unearthly quest. She is mother, sister, mistress, bride. Whatever in the world has lured, whatever has seemed to promise joy, has been premonitory of her existence, in the deep of sleep, if not in the cities and forests of the world. For she is the incarnation of the promise of perfection, the soul's assurance that, at the conclusion of its exile in a world of organized inadequacies, the bliss that once was known will be known again. The comforting, the nourishing, the good mother, young and beautiful, who was known to us, and even tasted, in the remotest past. Time sealed her away, yet she is dwelling still, like one who sleeps in timelessness, at the bottom of the timeless sea. The remembered image is not only benign, however, for the bad mother too. 1. The absent, unattainable mother, against whom aggressive fantasies are directed, and from whom a counter-aggression is feared. 2. The hampering, forbidding, punishing mother. 3. The mother who would hold to herself the grown child trying to push away. And finally, 4. The desired but forbidden mother, Oedipus complex, whose presence is a lure to dangerous desire, castration complex, persists in the hidden land of the adult's infant recollection and is sometimes even the greater force. She is at the root of such unattainable great goddess figures as that of the chaste and terrible Diana, whose absolute ruin of the young sportsman Actaeon illustrates what a blast of fear is contained in such symbols of the mind's and body's blocked desire. Actaeon chanced to see the dangerous goddess at noon, that fateful moment when the sun breaks in its youthful, strong ascent, balances, and begins the mighty plunge to death. He had left his companions to rest, together with his blooded dogs, after a morning of running game, and without conscious purpose had gone wandering, straying from his familiar hunting groves and fields, exploring through the neighboring woods. He discovered a vale, thick grown with cypresses and pine. He penetrated curiously into its fastness. There was a grotto within it, watered by a gentle, purling spring and with a stream that widened to a grassy pool. This shaded nook was the resort of Diana, and at that moment she was bathing among her nymphs, absolutely naked. She had put aside her hunting spear, her quiver, her unstrung bow, as well as her sandals and her robe. And one of the nude nymphs had bound up her tresses into a knot. Some of the others were pouring water from capacious urns. When the young, roving male broke into the pleasant haunt, a shriek of female terror went up, and all the bodies crowded about their mistress, trying to hide her from the profane eye. But she stood above them, head and shoulders. The youth had seen, and was continuing to see. She glanced for her bow, but it was out of reach, so she quickly took up what was at hand, namely water, and flung it into Actaeon's face. "Now you are free to tell, if you can," she cried at him angrily, "that you have seen the goddess nude." Figure 24. Diana and Actaeon, Marble Metope, Hellenic, Sicily, circa 460 B.C. Antlers sprouted on his head. His neck grew great and long, his ear tips sharp. His arms lengthened to legs, and his hands and feet became hooves. Terrified, he bounded, marveling that he should move so rapidly. But when he paused for breath and drink and beheld his features in a clear pool, he reared back aghast. A terrible fate then befell Actaeon. His own hounds, catching the scent of the great stag, came baying through the wood. In a moment of joy at hearing them he paused, but then spontaneously took fright and fled. The pack followed, gradually gaining. When they had come to his heels, the first of them flying at his flank, he tried to cry their names, but the sound in his throat was not human. They fixed him with their fangs. He went down, and his own hunting companions, shouting encouragement at the dogs, arrived in time to deliver the coup de grace. Diana, miraculously aware of the flight and death, could now rest appeased. 28. The mythological figure of the universal mother imputes to the cosmos the feminine attributes of the first, nourishing and protecting presence. The fantasy is primarily spontaneous, for there exists a close and obvious correspondence between the attitude of the young child toward its mother and that of the adult toward the surrounding material world. 29. But there has been also, in numerous religious traditions, a consciously controlled pedagogical utilization of this archetypal image for the purpose of the purging, balancing, and initiation of the mind into the nature of the visible world. In the tantric books of medieval and modern India, the sacred writings, sastras, of Hinduism are divided into 4 classes. 1. Sruti, which are regarded as direct divine revelation. These include the 4 Vedas, ancient books of Psalms, and certain of the Upanishads, ancient books of philosophy. 2. Smrta, which include the traditional teachings of the Orthodox sages, canonical instructions for domestic ceremonials, and certain works of secular and religious law, as well as the great Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, which of course includes the Bhagavad Gita. 3. Purana, which are the Hindu mythological and epic works par excellence. These treat of cosmogonic, theological, astronomical, and physical knowledge. And 4. Tantra, texts describing techniques and rituals for the worship of deities, and for the attainment of supernormal power. Among the Tantras are a group of particularly important scriptures, called Agamas, which are supposed to have been revealed directly by the universal god Shiva and his goddess Parvati. They are termed, therefore, the fifth Veda. These support a mystical tradition known specifically as the Tantra, which has exercised a pervasive influence on the later forms of Hindu and Buddhist iconography. Tantric symbolism was carried by medieval Buddhism out of India into Tibet, China, and Japan. The abode of the goddess is called Mani Dvipa, the Island of Jewels. Her couch and throne is there, in a grove of wish-fulfilling trees. The beaches of the isle are of golden sands. They are laved by the still waters of the ocean of the nectar of immortality. The goddess is red with the fire of life. The earth, the solar system, the galaxies of far-extending space, all swell within her womb. For she is the world creatrix, ever mother, ever virgin. She encompasses the encompassing, nourishes the nourishing, and is the life of everything that lives. She is also the death of everything that dies. The whole round of existence is accomplished within her sway, from birth, through adolescence, maturity, and senescence, to the grave. She is the womb and the tomb, the sow that eats her farrow. Thus she unites the good and the bad, exhibiting the two modes of the remembered mother, not as personal only, but as universal. The devotee is expected to contemplate the two with equal equanimity. Through this exercise his spirit is purged of its infantile, inappropriate sentimentalities and resentments, and his mind open to the inscrutable presence which exists, not primarily as good and bad, with respect to his childlike human convenience, his weal and woe, but as the law and image of the nature of being. The great Hindu mystic of the 19th century Ramakrishna, 1836–1886, was a priest in a temple newly erected to the Cosmic Mother at Dakshineswar, a suburb of Calcutta. The temple image displayed the divinity in her two aspects simultaneously, the terrible and the benign. Her four arms exhibited the symbols of her universal power. The upper left hand brandishing a bloody saber, the lower gripping by the hair a severed human head. The upper right was lifted in the fear not gesture, the lower extended in bestowal of boons. As necklace she wore a garland of human heads, her kilt was a girdle of human arms, her long tongue was out to lick blood. She was cosmic power, the totality of the universe, the harmonization of all the pairs of opposites, combining wonderfully the terror of absolute destruction with an impersonal yet motherly reassurance. As change, the river of time, the fluidity of life, the goddess at once creates, preserves, and destroys. Her name is Kali, the Black One, her title, the ferry across the ocean of existence. 30. Figure 25. Devouring Kali, carved wood, Nepal, 18th–19th century A.D. One quiet afternoon Ramakrishna beheld a beautiful woman ascend from the Ganges and approach the grove in which he was meditating. He perceived that she was about to give birth to a child. In a moment the babe was born, and she gently nursed it. Presently, however, she assumed a horrible aspect, took the infant in her now ugly jaws and crushed it, chewed it. Swallowing it, she returned again to the Ganges, where she disappeared. 31. Only geniuses capable of the highest realization can support the full revelation of the sublimity of this goddess. For lesser men she reduces her effulgence and permits herself to appear in forms concordant with their undeveloped powers. Fully to behold her would be a terrible accident for any person not spiritually prepared, as witness the unlucky case of the lusty young buck Actaeon. No saint was he, but a sportsman unprepared for the revelation of the form that must be beheld without the normal human, i.e., infantile, over and undertones of desire, surprise, and fear. Woman, in the picture language of mythology, represents the totality of what can be known. The hero is the one who comes to know. As he progresses in the slow initiation which is life, the form of the goddess undergoes for him a series of transfigurations. She can never be greater than himself, though she can always promise more than he is yet capable of comprehending. She lures, she guides, she bids him burst his fetters. And if he can match her import, the two, the knower and the known, will be released from every limitation. Woman is the guide to the sublime acme of sensuous adventure. By deficient eyes she is reduced to inferior states, by the evil eye of ignorance she is spellbound to banality and ugliness. But she is redeemed by the eyes of understanding. The hero who can take her as she is, without undue commotion but with the kindness and assurance she requires, is potentially the king, the incarnate god, of her created world. A story, for example, is told of the 5 sons of the Irish king Eochaid, of how, having gone one day hunting, they found themselves astray, shut in on every hand. Thirsty, they set off, one by one, to look for water. Fergus was the first, and he lights on a well, over which he finds an old woman standing sentry. The fashion of the hag is this: blacker than coal every joint and segment of her was, from crown to ground, comparable to a wild horse's tail, the grey wiry mass of hair that pierced her scalp's upper surface. with her sickle of a greenish-looking tusk that was in her head, and curled till it touched her ear, she could lop the verdant branch of an oak in full bearing. Blackened and smoke-bleared eyes she had, nose awry, wide-nostrilled, a wrinkled and freckled belly, variously unwholesome, warped crooked shins, garnished with massive ankles and a pair of capacious shovels. Knotty knees she had and livid nails. The beldame's whole description in fact was disgusting. "That's the way it is it?" said the lad, and, "That's the very way," she answered. "Is it guarding the well thou art?" he asked, and she said, "It is." "Dost thou license me to take away some water?" "I do," she consented, "yet only so that I have of thee one kiss on my cheek." "Not so," said he. "Then water shall not be conceded by me. My word I give," he went on, "that sooner than give thee a kiss I would perish of thirst." Then the young man departed to the place where his brethren were, and told them that he had not gotten water. Oliel, Brian, and Fiatra, likewise, went on the quest and equally attained to the identical well. Each solicited the old thing for water, but denied her the kiss. Finally it was Nile who went, and he came to the very well. "Let me have water, woman," he cried. "I will give it," said she, "and bestow on me a kiss." He answered, "For be giving thee a kiss, I will even hug thee." Then he bends to embrace her, and gives her a kiss. Which operation ended, and when he looked at her, in the whole world was not a young woman of gait more graceful, in universal semblance fairer than she. To be likened to the last fallen snow lying in trenches every portion of her was, from crown to sole. Plump and queenly forearms, fingers long and taper, straight legs of a lovely hue she had. 2 sandals of the white bronze betwixt her smooth and soft white feet and the earth. About her was an ample mantle of the choicest fleece pure crimson, and in the garment a brooch of white silver. She had lustrous teeth of pearl, great regal eyes, mouth red as the rowanberry. "Here, woman, is a galaxy of charms," said the young man. "That is true indeed. And who art thou?" he pursued. "Royal Rule am I," she answered, and uttered this. "King of Terra, I am Royal Rule. Go now," she said, "to thy brethren, and take with thee water. Moreover, thine and thy children's forever the kingdom and supreme power shall be. And as at the first thou hast seen me ugly, brutish, oathly, in the end, beautiful, even so is Royal Rule. For without battles, without fierce conflict, it may not be won, but in the result, he that is king of no matter what shows comely and handsome forth." 32. Such is Royal Rule? Such is life itself. The goddess guardian of the inexhaustible well, whether as Fergus, or as Actaeon, or as the prince of the lonesome isle discovered her, requires that the hero should be endowed with what the troubadours and minnesingers term the gentle heart. Not by the animal desire of an Actaeon, not by the fastidious revulsion of such as Fergus, can she be comprehended and rightly served, but only by gentleness. Aware, gentle sympathy. It was named in the romantic courtly poetry of 10th to 12th century Japan. Within the gentle heart love shelters himself, as birds within the green shade of the grove. Before the gentle heart, in nature's scheme, love was not, nor the gentle heart ere love. For with the sun, at once, so sprang the light immediately, nor was its birth before the sun's. And love hath his effect in gentleness, of very self, even as within the middle fire the heat's excess. 33. The meeting with the goddess, who is incarnate in every woman, is the final test of the talent of the hero to win the boon of love, charity, amor fati, which is life itself enjoyed as the encasement of eternity. And when the adventurer, in this context, is not a youth but a maid, she is the one who, by her qualities, her beauty, or her yearning, is fit to become the consort of an immortal. Then the heavenly husband descends to her and conducts her to his bed, whether she will or no. And if she has shunned him, the scales fall from her eyes; if she has sought him, her desire finds its peace. The Arapaho girl who followed the porcupine up the stretching tree was enticed to the camp circle of the people of the sky. There she became the wife of a heavenly youth. It was he who, under the form of the luring porcupine, had seduced her to his supernatural home. The king's daughter of the nursery tale, the day following the adventure at the well, heard a thumping at her castle door. The frog had arrived to press her to her bargain. And in spite of her great disgust, he followed her to her chair at table, shared the meal from her little golden plate and cup, even insisted on going to sleep with her in her little silken bed. In a tantrum she plucked him from the floor and flung him at the wall. When he fell, he was no frog but a king's son with kind and beautiful eyes. And then we hear that they were married and were driven in a beautiful coach back to the young man's waiting kingdom, where the two became a king and queen. Or once again, when Psyche had accomplished all of the difficult tasks, Jupiter himself gave to her a draught of the elixir of immortality, so that she is now and forever united with Cupid, her beloved, in the paradise of perfected form. The Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches celebrate the same mystery in the Feast of the Assumption. The Virgin Mary is taken up into the bridal chamber of heaven, where the King of Kings sits on his starry throne. O Virgin most prudent, whither goest thou, bright as the morn? All beautiful and sweet art thou, O daughter of Zion, fair as the moon, elect as the sun. 34. Figure 26. Vierge ouvrante, opening virgin, polychrome wood, France, 15th century A.D. 3. Woman as the temptress. The mystical marriage with the queen goddess of the world represents the hero's total mastery of life, for the woman is life, the hero its knower and master. And the testings of the hero, which were preliminary to his ultimate experience and deed, were symbolical of those crises of realization by means of which his consciousness came to be amplified and made capable of enduring the full possession of the mother-destroyer, his inevitable bride. With that he knows that he and the Father are one. He is in the Father's place. Thus phrased, in extremist terms, the problem may sound remote from the affairs of normal human creatures. Nevertheless, every failure to cope with a life situation must be laid, in the end, to a restriction of consciousness. Wars and temper tantrums are the makeshifts of ignorance. Regrets are illuminations come too late. The whole sense of the ubiquitous myth of the hero's passage is that it shall serve as a general pattern for men and women, wherever they may stand along the scale. Therefore it is formulated in the broadest terms. The individual has only to discover his own position with reference to this general human formula, and let it then assist him past his restricting walls. Who and where are his ogres? Those are the reflections of the unsolved enigmas of his own humanity. What are his ideals? Those are the symptoms of his grasp of life. In the office of the modern psychoanalyst, the stages of the hero adventure come to light again in the dreams and hallucinations of the patient. Depth beyond depth of self-ignorance is fathomed, with the analyst in the role of the helper, the initiatory priest. And always, after the first thrills of getting underway, the adventure develops into a journey of darkness, horror, disgust, and phantasmagoric fears. The crux of the curious difficulty lies in the fact that our conscious views of what life ought to be seldom correspond to what life really is. Generally we refuse to admit within ourselves, or within our friends, the fullness of that pushing, self-protective, malodorous, carnivorous, lecherous fever which is the very nature of the organic cell. Rather, we tend to perfume, whitewash, and reinterpret. Meanwhile imagining that all the flies in the ointment, all the hairs in the soup, are the faults of some unpleasant someone else. But when it suddenly dawns on us, or is forced to our attention, that everything we think or do is necessarily tainted with the odor of the flesh, then, not uncommonly, there is experienced a moment of revulsion. Life, the acts of life, the organs of life, woman in particular as the great symbol of life, become intolerable to the pure soul. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon, 'gainst self-slaughter. O God, God, so exclaims the great spokesman of this moment, Hamlet. How weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie on't, ah fie, 'tis an unweeded garden, that grows to seed, things rank and gross in nature. Possess it merely, that it should come to this. 35. The innocent delight of Oedipus in his first possession of the queen turns to an agony of spirit when he learns who the woman is. Like Hamlet, he is beset by the moral image of the father. Like Hamlet, he turns from the fair features of the world to search the darkness for a higher kingdom than this of the incest and adultery-ridden, luxurious, and incorrigible mother. The seeker of the life beyond life must press beyond her, surpass the temptations of her call, and soar to the immaculate ether beyond. For a god called him many times, from many sides at once. Ho, Oedipus! Thou Oedipus, why are we tarrying? It is full long that thou art stayed for. Come. 36. Where this Oedipus Hamlet revulsion remains to beset the soul, there the world, the body, and woman above all become the symbols no longer of victory but of defeat. A monastic puritanical, world-negating ethical system then radically and immediately transfigures all the images of myth. No longer can the hero rest in innocence with the goddess of the flesh, for she has become the queen of sin. So long as a man has any regard for this corpse-like body, writes the Hindu monk Sankaracharya, he is impure, and suffers from his enemies as well as from birth, disease and death, but when he thinks of himself as pure, as the essence of the good, and the immovable, he becomes free. Throw far away this limitation of a body which is inert and filthy by nature. Think of it no longer. For a thing that has been vomited, as you should vomit forth your body, can excite only disgust when it is recalled again to mind. 37. This is a point of view familiar to the West from the lives and writings of the saints. When Saint Peter observed that his daughter, Petronilla, was too beautiful, he obtained from God the favor that she should fall sick of a fever. Now one day when his disciples were by him, Titus said to him, You who cure all maladies, why do you not fix it so that Petronilla can get up from her bed? And Peter replied to him, Because I am satisfied with her condition as it is. This was by no means as much as to say he had not the power to cure her, for, immediately, he said to her, Get up, Petronilla, and make haste to wait on us. The young girl, cured, got up and came to serve them. But when she had finished, her father said to her, Petronilla, return to your bed. She returned, and was straightway taken again with the fever. And later, when she had begun to be perfect in her love of God, her father restored her to perfect health. At that time a noble gentleman named Flaccus, struck by her beauty, came to bid for her hand in marriage. She replied, If you wish to marry me, send a group of young girls to conduct me to your home. But when these had arrived, Petronilla directly set herself to fast and pray. Receiving communion, she lay back in her bed, and after 3 days rendered her soul up to God. 38. As a child, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux suffered from headaches. A young woman came to visit him one day, to soothe his sufferings with her songs. But the indignant child drove her from the room. And God rewarded him for his zeal, for he got up from his bed immediately and was cured. Now the ancient enemy of man, perceiving little Bernard to be of such wholesome disposition, exerted himself to set traps for his chastity. When the child, however, at the instigation of the devil, one day had stood staring at a lady for some time, suddenly he blushed for himself, and entered the icy water of a pond in penance, where he remained until frozen to his bones. Another time, when he was asleep, a young girl came naked to his bed. Bernard, becoming aware of her, yielded in silence the part of the bed in which he lay, and rolling over to the other side returned to sleep. Having stroked and caressed him for some time, the unhappy creature presently was so taken with shame, in spite of her shamelessness, that she got up and fled, full of horror at herself and of admiration for the young man. Still again, when Bernard together with some friends one time had accepted the hospitality of the home of a certain wealthy lady, she, observing his beauty, was seized with a passion to sleep with him. She arose that night from her bed, and came and placed herself at the side of her guest. But he, the minute he felt someone close to him, began to shout, "Thief! Thief!" Immediately thereupon, the woman scurried away, the entire house was on its feet, lanterns were lit, and everybody hunted around for the burglar. But since none was found, all returned to their beds and to sleep, with the sole exception of this lady, who, unable to close her eyes, again arose and slipped into the bed of her guest. Bernard began to shout, "Thief!" And again the alarms and investigations. After that, even a third time this lady brought herself to be spurned in like fashion, so that finally she gave up her wicked project, out of either fear or discouragement. On the road next day the companions of Bernard asked him why he had had so many dreams about thieves. And he replied to them, "I had really to repel the attacks of a thief, for my hostess tried to rob me of a treasure, which, had I lost it, I should never have been able to regain." All of which convinced Bernard that it was a pretty risky thing to live together with the serpent. So he planned to be quit of the world and enter the monastic order of the Cistercians. 39. Not even monastery walls, however, not even the remoteness of the desert, can defend against the female presences. For as long as the hermit's flesh clings to his bones and pulses warm, the images of life are alert to storm his mind. Saint Anthony, practicing his austerities in the Egyptian Thebaid, was troubled by voluptuous hallucinations perpetrated by female devils attracted to his magnetic solitude. Apparitions of this order, with loins of irresistible attraction and breasts bursting to be touched, are known to all the hermit resorts of history. Ah, bel hermit. Si tu passais ton doit sur mon épaule, si serait comme une traînée de fou dans tes veines. La possession de la moindre place de mon corps emplira d'une joie plus vehement que la conquête d'un empire. Avance tes lèvres. 40. Asterisk writes the New Englander Cotton Mather. The wilderness through which we are passing to the promised land is all filled with fiery flying serpents. But, blessed be God, none of them have hitherto so fastened upon us as to confound us utterly. All our way to heaven lies by dens of lions and the mounts of leopards. There are incredible droves of devils in our way. We are poor travelers in a world which is as well the devil's field, as the devil's jail. A world in which every nook whereof, the devil is encamped with bands of robbers to pester all that have their faces looking Zionward. 41. 4. Atonement with the Father. The bow of God's wrath is bent, and the arrow made ready on the string. And justice bends the arrow at your heart, and strains the bow, and it is nothing but the mere pleasure of God, and that of an angry God, without any promise or obligation at all, that keeps the arrow one moment from being made drunk with your blood. With these words Jonathan Edwards threatened the hearts of his New England congregation by disclosing to them, unmitigated, the ogre aspect of the Father. He riveted them to the pews with images of the mythological ordeal, for though the Puritan prohibited the graven image, yet he allowed himself the verbal. The wrath, Jonathan Edwards thundered. The wrath of God is like great waters that are dammed for the present, they increase more and more, and rise higher and higher till an outlet is given, and the longer the stream is stopped, the more rapid and mighty is its course when once it is let loose. 'Tis true, that judgment against your evil works has not been executed hitherto. The floods of God's vengeance have been withheld. But your guilt in the meantime is constantly increasing, and you are every day treasuring up more wrath. The waters are continually rising, and waxing more and more mighty, and there is nothing but the mere pleasure of God that holds the waters back that are unwilling to be stopped, and press hard to go forward. If God should only withdraw his hand from the floodgate, it would immediately fly open, and the fiery floods of the fierceness of the wrath of God would rush forth with inconceivable fury, and would come upon you with omnipotent power. And if your strength were 10,000 times greater than it is, yea 10,000 times greater than the strength of the stoutest, sturdiest devil in hell, it would be nothing to withstand or endure it. Having threatened with the element water, Pastor Jonathan next turns to the image of fire. The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you, and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath towards you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. He is of purer eyes than to bear to have you in his sight. You are 10,000 times so abominable in his eyes as the most hateful venomous serpent is in ours. You have offended him infinitely more than ever a stubborn rebel did his prince, and yet 'tis nothing but his hand that holds you from falling into the fire every moment. O sinner! You hang by a slender thread, with the flames of divine wrath flashing about it, and ready every moment to singe it, and burn it asunder. And you have no interest in any mediator, and nothing to lay hold of to save yourself, nothing to keep off the flames of wrath, nothing of your own, nothing that you ever have done, nothing that you can do, to induce God to spare you one moment. But now, at last, the great resolving image of the second birth, only for a moment, however. Thus are all you that never passed under a great change of heart, by the mighty power of the Spirit of God upon your souls, all that were never born again, and made new creatures, and raised from being dead in sin, to a state of new, and before altogether unexperienced light and life. However, you may have reformed your life in many things, and may have had religious affections, and may keep up a form of religion in your families and closets, and in the house of God, and may be strict in it. You are thus in the hands of an angry God. 'Tis nothing but his mere pleasure that keeps you from being this moment swallowed up in everlasting destruction. 42. Figure 27. Creation, detail, fresco, Italy, A.D. 1508 to 1512. God's mere pleasure, which defends the sinner from the arrow, the flood, and the flames, is termed in the traditional vocabulary of Christianity God's mercy, and the mighty power of the Spirit of God, by which the heart is changed, that is God's grace. In most mythologies, the images of mercy and grace are rendered as vividly as those of justice and wrath, so that a balance is maintained, and the heart is buoyed rather than scourged along its way. Fear not, says the hand gesture of the god Shiva, as he dances before his devotee the dance of the universal destruction. Fear not, for all rests well in God. The forms that come and go, and of which your body is but one, are the flashes of my dancing limbs. Know me in all, and of what shall you be afraid? The magic of the sacraments, made effective through the passion of Jesus Christ, or by virtue of the meditations of the Buddha, the protective power of primitive amulets and charms, and the supernatural helpers of the myths and fairy tales of the world, are mankind's assurances that the arrow, the flames, and the flood are not as brutal as they seem. Figure 28. Shiva, Lord of the Cosmic Dance, cast bronze, India, circa 10th-12th century A.D. The symbolism of this eloquent image has been well expounded by Ananda K. Kumaraswamy, 43, and by Heinrich Zimmer, 44. Briefly, the extended right hand holds the drum, the beat of which is the beat of time, time being the first principle of creation. The extended left holds the flame, which is the flame of the destruction of the created world. The second right hand is held in the gesture of fear not, while the second left, pointing to the lifted left foot, is held in a position symbolizing elephant. The elephant is the breaker of the way through the jungle of the world, i.e., the divine guide. The right foot is planted on the back of a dwarf, the demon, non-knowing, which signifies the passage of souls from God into matter, but the left is lifted, showing the release of the soul. The left is the foot to which the elephant hand is pointing and supplies the reason for the assurance, fear not. The god's head is balanced, serene and still, in the midst of the dynamism of creation and destruction, which is symbolized by the rocking arms and the rhythm of the slowly stamping right heel. This means that at the center all is still. Shiva's right earring is a man's, his left, woman's, for the god includes and is beyond the pairs of opposites. Shiva's facial expression is neither sorrowful nor joyous, but is the visage of the unmoved mover, beyond, yet present within, the world's bliss and pain. The wildly streaming locks represent the long untended hair of the Indian yogi, now flying in the dance of life. For the presence known in the joys and sorrows of life, and that found through withdrawn meditation, are but two aspects of the same, universal, non-dual, being consciousness bliss. Sat Cit Ananda. Shiva's bracelets, armbands, ankle rings, and Brahmanical thread, 45, are living serpents. This means that he is made beautiful by the serpent power, the mysterious creative energy of God, which is the material and the formal cause of his own self-manifestation in, and as, the universe with all its beings. In Shiva's hair may be seen a skull, symbolic of death, the forehead ornament of the Lord of Destruction, as well as a crescent moon, symbolic of birth and increase, which are his other boons to the world. Also, there is in his hair the flower of a datura, from which plant an intoxicant is prepared. Compare the wine of Dionysus and the wine of the Mass. A little image of the goddess Ganges is hidden in his locks, for it is he who receives on his head the impact of the descent of the divine Ganges from heaven, letting the life and salvation bestowing waters then flow gently to the earth for the physical and spiritual refreshment of mankind. The dance posture of the god may be visualized as the symbolic syllable aum, or, which is the verbal equivalent of the four states of consciousness and their fields of experience. A. Waking consciousness. U. Dream consciousness. M. Dreamless sleep. The silence around the sacred syllable is the unmanifest transcendent. 46. The god is thus within the worshipper as well as without. Such a figure illustrates the function and value of a graven image, and shows why long sermons are unnecessary among idol worshippers. The devotee is permitted to soak in the meaning of the divine symbol in deep silence and in his own good time. Furthermore, just as the god wears armbands and ankle rings, so does the devotee, and these mean what the gods mean. They are made of gold instead of serpents, gold, the metal that does not corrode, symbolizing immortality. I.e., immortality is the mysterious creative energy of God, which is the beauty of the body. Many other details of life and local custom are similarly duplicated, interpreted, and thus validated in the details of the anthropomorphic idols. In this way, the whole of life is made into a support for meditation. One lives in the midst of a silent sermon all the time. For the ogre aspect of the father is a reflex of the victim's own ego, derived from the sensational nursery scene that has been left behind, but projected before, and the fixating idolatry of that pedagogical non-thing is itself the fault that keeps one steeped in a sense of sin, sealing the potentially adult spirit from a better balanced, more realistic view of the father, and therewith of the world. Atonement, at one ment, consists in no more than the abandonment of that self-generated double monster. The dragon thought to be God, superego, asterisk, and the dragon thought to be sin, repressed id. But this requires an abandonment of the attachment to ego itself, and that is what is difficult. One must have a faith that the Father is merciful and then a reliance on that mercy. Therewith, the center of belief is transferred outside of the bedeviling God's tight scaly ring, and the dreadful ogres dissolve. It is in this ordeal that the hero may derive hope and assurance from the helpful female figure, by whose magic, pollen charms or power of intercession, he is protected through all the frightening experiences of the father's ego-shattering initiation. For if it is impossible to trust the terrifying father face, then one's faith must be centered elsewhere, Spider-Woman, Blessed Mother, and with that reliance for support, one endures the crisis, only to find, in the end, that the father and mother reflect each other, and are in essence the same. When the twin warriors of the Navajo, having departed from Spider-Woman with her advice and protective charms, had made their perilous way between the rocks that crush, through the reeds that cut to pieces, and the cactus plants that tear to pieces, and then across the boiling sands, they came at last to the house of the sun, their father. The door was guarded by 2 bears. These arose and growled, but the words that Spider-Woman had taught the boys made the animals crouch down again. After the bears, there threatened a pair of serpents, then winds, then lightnings, the guardians of the ultimate threshold. All were readily appeased, however, with the words of the prayer. Built of turquoise, the house of the sun was great and square, and it stood on the shore of a mighty water. The boys entered it, and they beheld a woman sitting in the west, 2 handsome young men in the south, 2 handsome young women in the north. The young women stood up without a word, wrapped the newcomers in 4 sky coverings, and placed them on a shelf. The boys lay quietly. Presently a rattle hanging over the door shook 4 times, and one of the young women said, "Our father is coming." 4 symbolical colors, representing the points of the compass, play a prominent role in Navajo iconography and cult. They are white, blue, yellow, and black, signifying, respectively, east, south, west, and north. These correspond to the red, white, green, and black on the hat of the African trickster divinity Edshu, for the house of the father, like the father himself, symbolizes the center. The twin heroes are tested against the symbols of the 4 directions, to discover whether they partake of the faults and limitations of any one of the quarters. The bearer of the sun strode into his home, removed the sun from his back, and hung it on a peg on the west wall of the room, where it shook and clanged for some time, going, "TLA, TLA, TLA, TLA." He turned to the older woman and demanded angrily, "Who are those 2 that entered here today?" But the woman did not reply. The young people looked at one another. The bearer of the sun put his question angrily 4 times before the woman said to him at last, "It would be well for you not to say too much. 2 young men came hither today, seeking their father. You have told me that you pay no visits when you go abroad, and that you have met no woman but me. Whose sons, then, are these?" She pointed to the bundle on the shelf, and the children smiled significantly at one another. The bearer of the sun took the bundle from the shelf, unrolled the 4 robes, the robes of dawn, blue sky, yellow evening light, and darkness, and the boys fell out on the floor. He immediately seized them. Fiercely, he flung them at some great sharp spikes of white shell that stood in the east. The boys tightly clutched their life feathers and bounded back. The man hurled them, equally, at spikes of turquoise in the south, Haliotis in the west, and black rock in the north. The boys always clutched their life feathers tightly and came bounding back. "I wish it were indeed true," said the sun, "that they were my children." The terrible father essayed then to steam the boys to death in an overheated sweat lodge. They were aided by the winds, who provided a protected retreat within the lodge in which to hide. "Yes, these are my children," said the sun when they emerged, but that was only a ruse, for he was still planning to trick them. The final ordeal was a smoking pipe filled with poison. A spiny caterpillar warned the boys and gave them something to put into their mouths. They smoked the pipe without harm, passing it back and forth to one another till it was finished. They even said it tasted sweet. The sun was proud. He was completely satisfied. "Now, my children," he asked, "what is it you want from me? Why do you seek me?" The twin heroes had won the full confidence of the sun, their father. 47. The need for great care on the part of the father, admitting to his house only those who have been thoroughly tested, is illustrated by the unhappy exploit of the lad Phaethon, described in a famous tale of the Greeks. Born of a virgin in Ethiopia and taunted by his playmates to search the question of his father, he set off across Persia and India to find the palace of the sun, for his mother had told him that his father was Phoebus, the god who drove the solar chariot. The palace of the sun stood high on lofty columns, bright with glittering gold and bronze that shone like fire. Gleaming ivory crowned the gables above, the double folding doors were radiant with burnished silver. And the workmanship was more beautiful than the materials. Climbing the steep path, Phaethon arrived beneath the roof. And he discovered Phoebus sitting on an emerald throne, surrounded by the hours and the seasons, and by day, month, year, and century. The bold youngster had to halt at the threshold, his mortal eyes unable to bear the light, but the father gently spoke to him across the hall. "Why have you come?" the father asked. "What do you seek, O Phaethon? A son no father need deny." The lad respectfully replied, "O my father, if thou grantest me the right to use that name." "Phoebus, light of the entire world, grant me a proof, my father, by which all may know me for thy true son." The great god set his glittering crown aside and bade the boy approach. He gathered him into his arms. Then he promised, sealing the promise with a binding oath, that any proof the lad desired would be granted. What Phaethon desired was his father's chariot and the right to drive the winged horses for a day. "Such a request," said the father, "proves my promise to have been rashly made." He put the boy a little away from him and sought to dissuade him from the demand. "In your ignorance," said he, "you are asking for more than can be granted even to the gods. Each of the gods may do as he will, and yet none, save myself, has the power to take his place in my chariot of fire. No, not even Zeus." Phoebus reasoned. Phaethon was adamant. Unable to retract the oath, the father delayed as long as time would allow, but was finally forced to conduct his stubborn son to the prodigious chariot. Its axle of gold and the pole of gold, its wheels with golden tires and a ring of silver spokes. The yoke was set with chrysolites and jewels. The hours were already leading the 4 horses from their lofty stalls, breathing fire and filled with ambrosial food. They put upon them the clanking bridles, the great animals pawed at the bars. Phoebus anointed Phaethon's face with an ointment to protect it against the flames and then placed on his head the radiant crown. "If, at least, you can obey your father's warnings," the divinity advised. "Spare the lash and hold tightly to the reins. The horses go fast enough of themselves. And do not follow the straight road directly through the 5 zones of heaven, but turn off at the fork to the left. The tracks of my wheels you will clearly see. Furthermore, so that the sky and earth may have equal heat, be careful to go neither too high nor too low. For if you go too high you will burn up the skies, and if you go too low ignite the earth. In the middle is the safest path. But hurry, while I am speaking, dewy night has reached her goal on the western shore. We are summoned. Behold, the dawn is glowing. Boy, may fortune aid and conduct you better than you can guide yourself. Here, grasp the reins." Tethys, the goddess of the sea, had dropped the bars, and the horses, with a jolt, abruptly started, cleaving with their feet the clouds, beating the air with their wings, outrunning all the winds that were rising from the same eastern quarter. Immediately, the chariot was so light without its accustomed weight, the car began to rock about like a ship tossing without ballast on the waves. The driver, panic-stricken, forgot the reins and knew nothing of the road. Wildly mounting, the team grazed the heights of the sky and startled the remotest constellations. The Great and Little Bear were scorched. The serpent lying curled about the polar stars grew warm, and with the heat grew dangerously fierce. Boötes took flight, encumbered with his plow. The scorpion struck with his tail. Figure 29. The Fall of Phaethon, ink on parchment, Italy, A.D. 1533. The chariot, having roared for some time through unknown regions of the air, knocking against the stars, next plunged down crazily to the clouds just above the ground. And the moon beheld, in amazement, her brother's horses running below her own. The clouds evaporated, the earth burst into flame, mountains blazed, cities perished with their walls, nations were reduced to ashes. That was the time the peoples of Ethiopia became black, for the blood was drawn to the surface of their bodies by the heat. Libya became a desert. The Nile fled in terror to the ends of the earth and hid its head, and it is hidden yet. Mother Earth, shielding her scorched brow with her hand, choking with hot smoke, lifted her great voice and called upon Jove, the father of all things, to save his world. "Look around," she cried at him. "The heavens are a smoke from pole to pole. Great Jove, if the sea perish, and the land, and all the realms of the sky, then we are back again in the chaos of the beginning. Take thought for the safety of our universe. Save from the flames whatever yet remains." Jove, the Almighty Father, hastily summoned the gods to witness that unless some measure were quickly taken all was lost. Thereupon he hurried to the zenith, took a thunderbolt in his right hand, and flung it from beside his ear. The car shattered, the horses, terrified, broke loose. Phaethon, fire raging in his hair, descended like a falling star. And the river Po received his burning frame. The naiads of that land consigned his body to a tomb, whereupon this epitaph: "Here Phaethon lies, in Phoebus' car he fared, and though he greatly failed, more greatly dared." 48. This tale of indulgent parenthood illustrates the antique idea that when the roles of life are assumed by the improperly initiated, chaos supervenes. When the child outgrows the popular idol of the mother breast and turns to face the world of specialized adult action, it passes, spiritually, into the sphere of the father, who becomes, for his son, the sign of the future task, and for his daughter, of the future husband. Whether he knows it or not, and no matter what his position in society, the father is the initiating priest through whom the young being passes on into the larger world. And just as, formerly, the mother represented the good and evil, so now does he, but with this complication, that there is a new element of rivalry in the picture. The son against the father for the mastery of the universe, and the daughter against the mother to be the mastered world. The traditional idea of initiation combines an introduction of the candidate into the techniques, duties, and prerogatives of his vocation with a radical readjustment of his emotional relationship to the parental images. The mystagogue, father or father substitute, is to entrust the symbols of office only to a son who has been effectually purged of all inappropriate infantile cathexes, for whom the just and personal exercise of the powers will not be rendered impossible by unconscious, or perhaps even conscious and rationalized, motives of self-aggrandizement, personal preference, or resentment. Ideally, the invested one has been divested of his mere humanity and is representative of an impersonal cosmic force. He is the twice born, he has become himself the father. And he is competent, consequently, now to enact himself the role of the initiator, the guide, the sun-door, through whom one may pass from the infantile illusions of good and evil, to an experience of the majesty of cosmic law, purged of hope and fear, and at peace in the understanding of the revelation of being. Once I dreamed, declared a little boy, that I was captured by cannonballs, sick. They all began to jump and yell. I was surprised to see myself in my own parlor. There was a fire, and a kettle was over it full of boiling water. They threw me into it, and once in a while the cook used to come over and stick a fork into me to see if I was cooked. Then he took me out and gave me to the chief, who was just going to bite me when I woke up. 49. I dreamed that I was at table with my wife, states a civilized gentleman. During the course of the meal I reached over and took our second child, a baby, and in a matter-of-fact fashion proceeded to put him into a green soup bowl, full of hot water or some hot liquid, for he came out cooked thoroughly, like chicken fricassee. I laid the viand on a breadboard at the table and cut it up with my knife. When we had eaten all of it except a small part like a chicken gizzard, I looked up, worried, to my wife and asked her, "Are you sure you wanted me to do this? Did you intend to have him for supper?" She answered, with a domestic frown, after he was so well cooked, there was nothing else to do. I was just about to finish the last piece, when I woke up. 50. This archetypal nightmare of the ogre father is made actual in the ordeals of primitive initiation. The boys of the Australian Murgen tribe, as we have seen, are first frightened and sent running to their mothers. The great father snake is calling for their foreskins. This places the women in the role of protectresses. A prodigious horn is blown, named Yirlungur, which is supposed to be the call of the great father snake, who has emerged from his hole. When the men come for the boys, the women grab up spears and pretend not only to fight but also to wail and cry, because the little fellows are going to be taken away and eaten. The men's triangular dancing ground is the body of the great father snake. There the boys are shown, during many nights, numerous dances symbolical of the various totem ancestors, and are taught the myths that explain the existing order of the world. Also, they are sent on a long journey to neighboring and distant clans, imitative of the mythological wanderings of the phallic ancestors. 51. In this way, within the great father snake as it were, they are introduced to an interesting new object world that compensates them for their loss of the mother, and the male phallus, instead of the female breast, is made the central point, axis mundi, of the imagination. The culminating instruction of the long series of rites is the release of the boy's own hero penis from the protection of its foreskin, through the frightening and painful attack upon it of the circumciser. The father, i.e., circumciser, is the one who separates the child from the mother, writes Dr. Roheim. What is cut off the boy is really the mother. The glands in the foreskin is the child in the mother. 52. It is interesting to note the continuance to this day of the rite of circumcision in the Hebrew and Mohammedan cults, where the feminine element has been scrupulously purged from the official, strictly monotheistic mythology. God forgiveth not the sin of joining other gods with him, we read in the Quran. The pagans, leaving Allah, call but upon female deities. 53. Among the Arunta, for example, the sound of the bull roars is heard from all sides when the moment has arrived for this decisive break from the past. It is night, and in the weird light of the fire suddenly appear the circumciser and his assistant. The noise of the bull roars is the voice of the great demon of the ceremony, and the pair of operators are its apparition. With their beards thrust into their mouths, signifying anger, their legs widely extended, and their arms stretched forward, the two men stand perfectly still, the actual operator in front, holding in his right hand the small flint knife with which the operation is to be conducted, and his assistant pressing close up behind him, so that the two bodies are in contact with each other. Then a man approaches through the firelight, balancing a shield on his head and at the same time snapping the thumb and first finger of each hand. The bull roars are making a tremendous din, which can be heard by the women and children in their distant camp. The man with the shield on his head goes down on one knee just a little in front of the operator, and immediately one of the boys is lifted from the ground by a number of his uncles, who carry him feet foremost and place him on the shield, while in deep, loud tones a chant is thundered forth by all the men. The operation is swiftly performed, the fearsome figures retire immediately from the lighted area, and the boy, in a more or less dazed condition, is attended to, and congratulated by the men to whose estate he has now just arrived. You have done well, they say, you did not cry out. 54. The native Australian mythologies teach that the first initiation rites were carried out in such a way that all the young men were killed. 55. The ritual is thus shown to be, among other things, a dramatized expression of the Oedipal aggression of the elder generation, and the circumcision, a mitigated castration. 56. But the rites provide also for the cannibal, patricidal impulse of the younger, rising group of males, and at the same time reveal the benign self-giving aspect of the archetypal father. For during the long period of symbolical instruction, there is a time when the initiates are forced to live only on the fresh-drawn blood of the older men. The natives, we are told, are particularly interested in the Christian communion rite, and having heard about it from missionaries they compare it to the blood-drinking rituals of their own. 57. In the evening the men come and take their places according to tribal precedents, the boy lying with his head on his father's thighs. He must make no movement or he will die. The father blindfolds him with his hands because if the boy should witness the following proceedings it is believed that his father and mother will both die. The wooden vessel or bark vessel is placed near one of the boy's mother's brothers, who, having tied his arm lightly, pierces the upper part with a nosebone and holds the arm over the vessel until a certain amount of blood has been taken. The man next to him pierces his arm, and so on, until the vessel is filled. It may hold 2 quarts or so. The boy takes a long draught of the blood. Should his stomach rebel, the father holds his throat to prevent his ejecting the blood, because if it happens his father, mother, sisters, and brothers would all die. The remainder of the blood is thrown over him. From this time on, sometimes for a whole moon, the boy is allowed no other food than human blood, Yaminga, the mythical ancestor, having made this law. Sometimes the blood is dried in the vessel and then the guardian cuts it in sections with his nosebone, and it is eaten by the boy, the 2 end sections first. The sections must be regularly divided or the boy will die. 58. In one recorded case, 2 of the boys looked up when they were not supposed to. Then the old men went forward, each with a stone knife in hand. Stooping over the 2 boys they opened veins in each. Out flowed the blood, and the other men all raised a death cry. The boys were lifeless. The old weary nuns, medicine men, dipping their stone knives in the blood, touched with them the lips of all present. The bodies of the burra victims were cooked. Each man who had been to 5 burras ate a piece of this flesh. No others were allowed to see this done. 61. Frequently the men who give their blood faint and remain in a state of coma for an hour or more because of exhaustion. 59. In former times, writes another observer, this blood, drunk ceremonially by the novices, was obtained from a man who was killed for the purpose, and portions of his body were eaten. 60. Here, comments Dr. Roheim, we come as near to a ritual representation of the killing and eating of the primal father as we can ever get. There can be no doubt that no matter how unilluminated the stark naked Australian savages may seem to us, their symbolical ceremonials represent a survival into modern times of an incredibly old system of spiritual instruction, the far-flung evidences of which are to be found not only in all the lands and islands bordering the Indian Ocean, but also among the remains of the archaic centers of what we tend to regard as our own very special brand of civilization. Just how much the old men know, it is difficult to judge from the published accounts of our Occidental observers. But it can be seen from a comparison of the figures of Australian ritual with those familiar to us from higher cultures, that the great themes, the ageless archetypes, and their operation upon the soul remain the same. For an astounding revelation of the survival in contemporary Melanesia of a symbolic system essentially identical with that of the Egypto-Babylonian, Trojan-Cretan, labyrinth complex, of the 2nd millennium B.C. See John Layard's Stone Men of Malekula, 62. W.F.J. Knight has discussed the evident relationship of the Malekulan, journey of the soul to the underworld, with the classical descent of Aeneas, and the Babylonian of Gilgamesh, 63. While W.J. Perry thought he could recognize evidences of this culture continuity running all the way from Egypt and Sumer out through the oceanic area to North America, 64. Many scholars have pointed out the close correspondences between the details of the classical Greek and primitive Australian rites of initiation, 65. It is still uncertain by what means and in what eras the mythological and cultural patterns of the various archaic civilizations may have been disseminated to the farthest corners of the earth. Yet it can be stated categorically that few, if any, of the so-called primitive cultures studied by our anthropologists represent autochthonous growths. They are, rather, local adaptations, provincial degenerations, and immensely old fossilizations of folkways that were developed in very different lands, often under much less simple circumstances, and by other races. 66. Come, O Dithyrambos, enter this my male womb. 67. This cry of Zeus, the thunder hurler, to the child, his son, Dionysus, sounds the leitmotif of the Greek mysteries of the initiatory's second birth. And bull voices roar thereto from somewhere out of the unseen, fearful semblances, and from a drum an image as it were of thunder underground is borne on the air heavy with dread. 68. The word, Dithyrambos, itself, as an epithet of the killed and resurrected Dionysus, was understood by the Greeks to signify him of the double door, him who had survived the awesome miracle of the second birth. And we know that the choral songs, dithyrambs, and dark, blood-reeking rites in celebration of the god, associated with the renewal of vegetation, the renewal of the moon, the renewal of the sun, the renewal of the soul, and solemnized at the season of the resurrection of the year god, represent the ritual beginnings of the Attic tragedy. Throughout the ancient world such myths and rites abounded, the deaths and resurrections of Tammuz, Adonis, Mithra, Verbius, Attis, and Osiris, and of their various animal representatives, goats and sheep, bulls, pigs, horses, fish, and birds, are known to every student of comparative religion. The popular carnival games of the Whitsuntide Louts, Green George, John Barleycorns, and Kostrubonkos, carrying out winter, bringing in summer, and killing of the Christmas wren have continued the tradition, in a mood of frolic, into our contemporary calendar, 69, and through the Christian Church. In the mythology of the fall and redemption, crucifixion, and resurrection, the second birth of baptism, the initiatory blow on the cheek at confirmation, the symbolical eating of the flesh and drinking of the blood, solemnly, and sometimes effectively, we are united to those immortal images of initiatory might, through the sacramental operation of which man, since the beginning of his day on earth, has dispelled the terrors of his phenomenality and won through to the all-transfiguring vision of a mortal being. For if the blood of bulls and of goats, and the ashes of an heifer sprinkling the unclean, sanctifieth to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? 70. Figure 30. The Sorcerer, rock engraving with black paint fill-in, Paleolithic, France, circa 10,000 B.C. There is a folktale told by the Basumba of East Africa, of a man whose dead father appeared to him, driving the cattle of death, and conducted him along a path that went into the ground, as into a vast burrow. They came to an extensive area where there were some people. The father hid the son and went off to sleep. The great chief, Death, appeared the next morning. One side of him was beautiful, but the other side was rotten, maggots were dropping to the ground. His attendants were gathering the maggots. The attendants washed the sores, and when they had finished, Death said, "The one born today, if he goes trading, he will be robbed. The woman who conceives today, she will die with the child conceived. The man who cultivates today, his crops have perished. The one who is to go into the jungle has been eaten by the lion." Death thus pronounced the universal curse and returned to rest. But the following morning, when he appeared, his attendants washed and perfumed the beautiful side, massaging it with oil. When they had finished, Death pronounced the blessing, "The one born today, may he become wealthy. May the woman who conceives today give birth to a child who will live to be old. The one born today, let him go into the market, may he strike good bargains, may he trade with the blind. The man who is to enter the jungle, may he kill game, may he discover even elephants. Because today I pronounce the benediction." The father then said to the son, "If you had arrived today, many things would have come into your possession. But now it is clear that poverty has been ordained for you. Tomorrow you had better go." And the son returned to his home. 71. Figure 31. The Universal Father, Viracocha, weeping, bronze, pre-Incan, Argentina, circa A.D. 650 to 750. The sun in the underworld, Lord of the dead, is the other side of the same radiant king who rules and gives the day. For, who is it that sustains you from the sky and from the earth? And who is it that brings out the living from the dead and the dead from the living? And who is it that rules and regulates all affairs? 72. We recall the Wachaga tale of the very poor man, Kayazimba, who was transported by a crone to the zenith, where the sun rests at noon. 73. There the great chief bestowed on him prosperity. And we recall the trickster god Edshu, described in a tale from the other coast of Africa. 74. Spreading strife was his greatest joy. These are differing views of the same dreadful providence. In him are contained and from him proceed the contradictions, good and evil, death and life, pain and pleasure, boons and deprivation. As the person of the sun door, he is the fountainhead of all the pairs of opposites. With him are the keys of the unseen. In the end, unto him will be your return. Then will he show you the truth of all that ye did. 75. The mystery of the apparently self-contradictory father is rendered tellingly in the figure of a great divinity of prehistoric Peru, named Viracocha. His tiara is the sun. He grasps a thunderbolt in either hand, and from his eyes descend, in the form of tears, the rains that refresh the life of the valleys of the world. Viracocha is the universal God, the creator of all things, and yet, in the legends of his appearances upon the earth, he is shown wandering as a beggar, in rags and reviled. One is reminded of the Gospel of Mary and Joseph at the indoors of Bethlehem, 76, and of the classical story of the begging of Jove and Mercury at the home of Baucis and Philemon, 77. One is reminded also of the unrecognized Edshu. This is a theme frequently encountered in mythology. Its sense is caught in the words of the Quran. Whithersoever ye turn, there is the presence of Allah, 78. Though he is hidden in all things, say the Hindus, that soul shines not forth, yet he is seen by subtle seers with superior, subtle intellect, 79. Split the stick, runs a Gnostic aphorism, and there is Jesus, 80. Viracocha, therefore, in this manner of manifesting his ubiquity, participates in the character of the highest of the universal gods. Furthermore, his synthesis of sun god and storm god is familiar. We know it through the Hebrew mythology of Yahweh, in whom the traits of two gods are united. Yahweh, a storm god, and El, a solar, It is apparent in the Navajo personification of the father of the twin warriors. It is obvious in the character of Zeus, as well as in the thunderbolt and halo of certain forms of the Buddha image. The meaning is that the grace that pours into the universe through the sun door is the same as the energy of the bolt that annihilates and is itself indestructible. The delusion-shattering light of the imperishable is the same as the light that creates. Or again, in terms of a secondary polarity of nature, the fire blazing in the sun glows also in the fertilizing storm. The energy behind the elemental pair of opposites, fire and water, is one and the same. But the most extraordinary and profoundly moving of the traits of Viracocha, this nobly conceived Peruvian rendition of the universal God, is the detail that is peculiarly his own, namely that of the tears. The living waters are the tears of God. Herewith the world discrediting insight of the monk. All life is sorrowful, as combined with the world begetting affirmative of the Father. Life must be. In full awareness of the life anguish of the creatures of his hand, in full consciousness of the roaring wilderness of pains, the brain-splitting fires of the deluded, self-ravaging, lustful, angry universe of his creation, this divinity acquiesces in the deed of supplying life to life. To withhold the seminal waters would be to annihilate, yet to give them forth is to create this world that we know. For the essence of time is flux, dissolution of the momentarily existent, and the essence of life is time. In his mercy, in his love for the forms of time, this demiurgic man of men yields countenance to the sea of pangs. But in his full awareness of what he is doing, the seminal waters of the life that he gives are the tears of his eyes. The paradox of creation, the coming of the forms of time out of eternity, is the germinal secret of the Father. It can never be quite explained. Therefore, in every system of theology there is an umbilical point, an Achilles tendon which the finger of mother life has touched, and where the possibility of perfect knowledge has been impaired. The problem of the hero is to pierce himself, and therewith his world, precisely through that point, to shatter and annihilate that key knot of his limited existence. The problem of the hero going to meet the Father is to open his soul beyond terror to such a degree that he will be ripe to understand how the sickening and insane tragedies of this vast and ruthless cosmos are completely validated in the majesty of being. The hero transcends life with its peculiar blind spot and for a moment rises to a glimpse of the source. He beholds the face of the Father, understands, and the two are atoned. In the biblical story of Job, the Lord makes no attempt to justify in human or any other terms the ill pay meted out to his virtuous servant, a simple and upright man, and fearing God, and avoiding evil. Nor was it for any sins of their own that Job's servants were slain by the Chaldean troops, his sons and daughters crushed by a collapsing roof. When his friends arrive to console him, they declare, with a pious faith in God's justice, that Job must have done some evil to have deserved to be so frightfully afflicted. But the honest, courageous, horizon-searching sufferer insists that his deeds have been good, whereupon the comforter, Elihu, charges him with blasphemy, as naming himself more just than God. When the Lord himself answers Job out of the whirlwind, he makes no attempt to vindicate his work in ethical terms, but only magnifies his presence, bidding Job do likewise on earth in human emulation of the way of heaven. Gird up thy loins now like a man, I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me, that thou mayest be righteous? Hast thou an arm like God, or canst thou thunder with a voice like him? Deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty. Cast abroad the rage of thy wrath, and behold every one that is proud and abase him. Look on every one that is proud, and bring him low, and tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together, and bind their faces in secret. Then I will also confess unto thee that thine own hand can save thee. 81. There is no word of explanation, no mention of the dubious wager with Satan described in chapter 1 of the book of Job. Only a thunder and lightning demonstration of the fact of facts, namely that man cannot measure the will of God, which derives from a sender beyond the range of human categories. Categories, indeed, are totally shattered by the Almighty of the book of Job, and remain shattered to the last. Nevertheless, to Job himself the revelation appears to have made soul-satisfying sense. He was a hero who, by his courage in the fiery furnace, his unreadiness to break down and grovel before a popular conception of the character of the All-Highest, had proven himself capable of facing a greater revelation than the one that satisfied his friends. We cannot interpret his words of the last chapter as those of a man merely intimidated. They are the words of one who has seen something surpassing anything that has been said by way of justification. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself, and repent in dust and ashes. 82. The pious comforters are humbled. Job is rewarded with a fresh house, fresh servants, and fresh daughters and sons. After this lived Job 140 years, and saw his sons, and his sons' sons, even 4 generations. So Job died, being old and full of days. 83. For the son who has grown really to know the Father, the agonies of the ordeal are readily borne. The world is no longer a vale of tears but a bliss-yielding, perpetual manifestation of the presence. Contrast with the wrath of the angry God known to Jonathan Edwards and his flock, the following tender lyric from the miserable Eastern European ghettos of that same century. O, Lord of the universe! I will sing thee a song. Where canst thou be found? And where canst thou not be found? Where I pass, there art thou. Where I remain, there 2. Thou art. Thou, and only thou. Doth it go well? 'Tis thanks to thee. Doth it go ill? 'Tis also thanks to thee. Thou art, thou hast been, and thou wilt be. Thou didst reign, thou reignest, and thou wilt reign. Thine is heaven, thine is earth. Thou fillest the high regions. And thou fillest the low regions. Wheresoever I turn, thou, O thou, art there. 84. Figure 32. Bodhisattva, Temple Banner, Tibet, 19th century A.D. 5. Apotheosis. One of the most powerful and beloved of the bodhisattvas of the Mahayana Buddhism of Tibet, China, and Japan is the lotus bearer, Avalokitesvara, the Lord looking down in pity, so called because he regards with compassion all sentient creatures suffering the evils of existence. To him goes the millionfold repeated prayer of the prayer wheels and temple gongs of Tibet. Om Mani Padme Hum, the jewel is in the lotus. To him go perhaps more prayers per minute than to any single divinity known to man. For when, during his final life on earth as a human being, he shattered for himself the bounds of the last threshold, which moment opened to him the timelessness of the void beyond the frustrating mirage enigmas of the named and bounded cosmos, he paused. He made a vow that before entering the void he would bring all creatures without exception to enlightenment, and since then he has permeated the whole texture of existence with the divine grace of his assisting presence, so that the least prayer addressed to him, throughout the vast spiritual empire of the Buddha, is graciously heard. Under differing forms he traverses the 10,000 worlds, and appears in the hour of need and prayer. He reveals himself in human form with 2 arms, in superhuman forms with 4 arms, or with 6, or 12, or 1,000, and he holds in one of his left hands the lotus of the world. Hinayana or Theravada Buddhism, the Buddhism surviving in Ceylon, Burma, and Thailand, reveres the Buddha as a human hero, a supreme saint and sage. Mahayana Buddhism, on the other hand, the Buddhism of the North, regards the enlightened one as a world savior, an incarnation of the universal principle of enlightenment. A bodhisattva is a personage on the point of Buddhahood, according to the Hinayana view, an adept who will become a Buddha in a subsequent reincarnation. According to the Mahayana view, as the following paragraphs will show, a type of world savior, representing particularly the universal principle of compassion. The word bodhisattva, Sanskrit, means, whose being or essence is enlightenment. Mahayana Buddhism has developed a pantheon of many bodhisattvas and many past and future Buddhas. These all inflect the manifested powers of the transcendent, one and only Adi Buddha, primal Buddha, 87, who is the highest conceivable source and ultimate boundary of all being, suspended in the void of non-being like a wonderful bubble. Like the Buddha himself, this godlike being is a pattern of the divine state to which the human hero attains who has gone beyond the last terrors of ignorance. When the envelopment of consciousness has been annihilated, then he becomes free of all fear, beyond the reach of change, 85. This is the release potential within us all, and which anyone can attain, through herohood. For, as we read, all things are Buddha things. 86. Or again, and this is the other way of making the same statement, all beings are without self. The world is filled and illumined by, but does not hold, the bodhisattva, he whose being is enlightenment. Rather, it is he who holds the world, the lotus. Pain and pleasure do not enclose him, he encloses them, and with profound repose. And since he is what all of us may be, his presence, his image, the mere naming of him, helps. He wears a garland of 8,000 rays, in which is seen fully reflected a state of perfect beauty. The color of his body is purple gold. His palms have the mixed color of 500 lotuses, while each fingertip has 84,000 signet marks, and each mark 84,000 colors. Each color has 84,000 rays which are soft and mild and shine over all things that exist. With these jewel hands he draws and embraces all beings. The halo surrounding his head is studded with 500 Buddhas, miraculously transformed, each attended by 500 bodhisattvas, who are attended, in turn, by numberless gods. And when he puts his feet down to the ground, the flowers of diamonds and jewels that are scattered cover everything in all directions. The color of his face is gold, while in his towering crown of gems stands a Buddha 250 miles high, 88. In China and Japan, this sublimely gentle bodhisattva is represented not only in male form, but also as female. Kuan Yin of China, Canon of Japan, the Madonna of the Far East, is precisely this benevolent regarder of the world. She will be found in every Buddhist temple of the farthest Orient. She is blessed alike to the simple and to the wise, for behind her vow there lies a profound intuition, world-redeeming, world-sustaining. The pause on the threshold of nirvana, the resolution to forego until the end of time, which never ends, immersion in the untroubled pool of eternity, represents a realization that the distinction between eternity and time is only apparent, made, perforce, by the rational mind, but dissolved in the perfect knowledge of the mind that has transcended the pairs of opposites. What is understood is that time and eternity are 2 aspects of the same experience whole, 2 planes of the same non-dual ineffable, i.e., the jewel of eternity is in the lotus of birth and death. Om Mani Padme Hum. The first wonder to be noted here is the androgynous character of the bodhisattva. Masculine Avalokitesvara, feminine Kuan Yin. Figure 33. Kuan Yin, the Avalokitesvara bodhisattva, painted wood, China, 11th-13th century A.D. Male-female gods are not uncommon in the world of myth. They emerge always with a certain mystery, for they conduct the mind beyond objective experience into a symbolic realm where duality is left behind. Awanuilona, chief god of the Pueblo of Zuni, the maker and container of all, is sometimes spoken of as he, but is actually he-she. The great original of the Chinese chronicles, the holy woman tf1, combined in her person the masculine yang and the feminine yin. Yang, the light, active, masculine principle, and yin, the dark, passive, and feminine, in their interaction underlie and constitute the whole world of forms, the 10,000 things. They proceed from and together make manifest Tao, the source and law of being. Tao means road or way. Tao is the way or course of nature, destiny, cosmic order, the absolute made manifest. Tao is therefore also truth, right conduct. Yang and yin together as Tao are depicted thus, yin-yang. Tao underlies the cosmos. Tao inhabits every created thing. The Kabbalistic teachings of the medieval Jews, as well as the Gnostic Christian writings of the 2nd century, represent the Word made flesh as androgynous, which was indeed the state of Adam as he was created, before the female aspect, Eve, was removed into another form. And among the Greeks, not only Hermaphrodite, the child of Hermes and Aphrodite, 89, but Eros too, the divinity of love, the first of the gods, according to Plato, 90, were in sex both female and male. So God created man in his own image, in the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. 91. The question may arise in the mind as to the nature of the image of God, but the answer is already given in the text and is clear enough. When the Holy One, blessed be he, created the first man, he created him androgynous. 92. The removal of the feminine into another form symbolizes the beginning of the fall from perfection into duality, and it was naturally followed by the discovery of the duality of good and evil, exile from the garden where God walks on earth, and thereupon the building of the wall of paradise, constituted of the coincidence of opposites, 93, by which man, now man and woman, is cut off from not only the vision but even the recollection of the image of God. This is the biblical version of a myth known to many lands. It represents one of the basic ways of symbolizing the mystery of creation, the devolvement of eternity into time, the breaking of the one into the two and then the many, as well as the generation of new life through the reconjunction of the two. This image stands at the beginning of the cosmogonic cycle, 94. And with equal propriety at the conclusion of the hero task, at the moment when the wall of paradise is dissolved, the divine form found and recollected, and wisdom regained. 95. Figure 34. Androgynous ancestor, carved wood, Mali, 20th century A.D. Tiresias, the blinded seer, was both male and female. His eyes were closed to the broken forms of the light world of the pairs of opposites, yet he saw in his own interior darkness the destiny of Oedipus. 96. Shiva appears united in a single body with Sakti, his spouse, he the right side, she the left, in the manifestation known as Ardhanarishvara, the half-woman lord. 97. The ancestral images of certain African and Melanesian tribes show on one being the breasts of the mother and the beard and penis of the father. 98. And in Australia, about a year following the ordeal of the circumcision, the candidate for full manhood undergoes a second ritual operation, that of subincision, a slitting open of the underside of the penis, to form a permanent cleft into the urethra. The opening is termed the penis womb. It is a symbolical male vagina. The hero has become, by virtue of the ceremonial, more than man. 99. The blood for ceremonial painting and for gluing white birds down to the body is derived by the Australian fathers from their subincision holes. They break open again the old wounds and let it flow. 100. It symbolizes at once the menstrual blood of the vagina and the semen of the male, as well as urine, water, and male milk. The flowing shows that the old men have the source of life and nourishment within themselves. 101. i.e., that they and the inexhaustible world fountain are the same.